presenting the cases to the board today for their review and consideration. At this time, respectfully, we would ask you to turn off your cell phone ringer, turn off your iPad ringer, turn off any electronic devices that would make noise and potentially interrupt the board's proceedings or any of today's speakers. Thank you in advance for your cooperation on that. For each of today's public hearings, the board reviews correspondence that's been submitted in advance of the hearing, whether in support of or opposition to the cases. The board reviews correspondence from other government agencies, from elected officials, as well as site plans, maps, photographs, and other documents which comprise the case record. Staff will make a presentation of some of those documents to kick off today's hearings. And then once the hearing is underway, the appellant will have the opportunity to present his or her case to the board. After the appellant's presentation, the board would hear from those wishing to speak in support of the appeal. And if the appeal, in fact, has opposition, then the board would then hear from those parties. After the opposition completes their testimony, the appellant would have an opportunity to present rebuttal testimony. Under BZA rules, an appellant has 10 minutes for a presentation if there's no opposition present. For contested cases, BZA rules allow 15 minutes to each side for testimony. Should the appellant wish to provide rebuttal testimony, then that appellant should reserve some portion of the originally allotted 15 minutes. At the conclusion of each hearing, the board will deliberate and then vote on the individual case in question. The board's vested with the power to act on these cases under the provisions of the Metro Zoning Code, Section 17.40.180. All section numbers that we refer to today come from the Metro Zoning Code, which applies to the entire jurisdiction of the metropolitan government. The zoning code was adopted by the Metro Council and took effect on January the 1st of 1998. I'll introduce the entire zoning code and make it part of today's record rather than reading it in on each individual case. The Metropolitan Code requires a record of these proceedings. The BZA meetings are actually recorded for Metro's television network and later produced for YouTube as well, which is easily accessible for those needing to review today's proceedings. Because of that, it's imperative that anyone addressing the board come forward. Do not address the board from your seat. Please come forward and take a seat here at the front. Use one of the microphones. Introduce yourself by name and address, then make the desired presentation. We're delighted that you're here and have the opportunity to participate. The Metropolitan Code also requires 4 members of our 7-member board in order to establish quorum. The code requires at least 4 affirmative votes in order to grant an appeal. In the event that only 4 members are present and that appeal fails to receive 4 affirmative votes, then the appeal will be re-advertised for the next available public hearing. In the event that 5 or more members are present, which of course is the case at this hour, and the appeal fails to receive 4 affirmative votes, then the case will remain on the board's agenda for the next 30 days. Applications that fail to receive 4 affirmative votes within that 30-day window shall be denied by operation of law. Under board rules, an aggrieved party may file an appeal from any board decision to the Chancery Court within 60 days of the hearing date. Additionally, an aggrieved party may file a motion for rehearing within 60 days of the original hearing date, pursuant to the terms of the BZA rules and regulations. After that time elapses, the board's decision becomes final and no further action can be taken. For the appellants, if your appeal is granted, you are required to obtain the permit for which you have applied. A permit must be obtained within 2 years in order for the board's approval to remain valid. It should also be noted that if any false or misleading testimony is presented to the board, then any board approval could be revoked at a later date by means of a show cause hearing before the board. Mr. Chairman, I submit that all the cases have been filed in the proper order. All appellants have been notified by certified mail, and all legal notice requirements have been fulfilled. We have a handful of preliminary announcements as we begin today. 2 cases that were on today's agenda have been withdrawn. First, case number 2016-192 on Sevier Court has been withdrawn. And case number 2017-015 on Longwood Place has also been withdrawn. Those matters will not be heard by the board. Additionally, Mr. Chairman, we have a number of cases that will be deferred to a later board date. First, case 2016-127 at 5056 Pine Valley Road will be deferred. Case number 2017-008 at 1215 Gallatin Pike will be deferred. Case 2017-013 at 1601 57th Avenue North will be deferred. And Two other cases have been identified for deferral, but representatives to those appellants wish to address the board themselves, the first of which is case number 2016-132 for property at 5009 Wyoming. Counsel, Mr. Chris Dunn is here on behalf of the appellant and wish to address the board with regard to that request.
Okay. Please come forward and sit down and turn on the microphone and tell us about case 132.
Very well. My name is Chris Dunn, and I'm a partner with the law firm of Waller Lansden here in Nashville. In the fall of last year, I heard about a Sylvan Park family that needed a hand with a boundary issue. Specifically, I heard about a grandfather who had constructed a platform for his granddaughter. His granddaughter's name is Rowan. Rowan has enough courage to fill the room, but she suffers from cerebral palsy, and she is somewhat unsteady on her feet and prefers hard, flat surfaces. My client, last name Mr. Wilkinson, who's here today, constructed a platform on the side of his home. He had lived there since 1981, and the platform, unfortunately, entered into the setback on his lot, and there was some concern by a neighbor in that regard. And so he had filed an appeal, and I got involved a little bit before Thanksgiving to try to see if I could assist. I'm not a land use expert by any stretch. I'm a construction lawyer, but I wanted to see if I could help because I know his motivation was in the right place. What I had intended to do on Tuesday morning was come before you and ask for a variance, and I think that I had some grounds that would have been appropriate for that. But that has changed a great bit, that plan in the last 48 hours, in large part because of the gentleman seated to my right, who is Dan Rose. Dan is the general counsel at Rogers Group here in Nashville. He's a client of mine. He is probably about twice as smart as I am, and I had talked to Dan in December about how to handle the case, and on Tuesday morning I was back at work and got a text from Dan, and Dan had come up with a better plan than I had, which was for Rogers Group to fund the construction of a new platform that we very much hope would not be in the setback. And he expressed his willingness and asked me to convey to the client that they would back that effort financially. In addition to Dan's help, two other gentlemen from Nashville have volunteered in the last 24 hours to assist in getting the platform rebuilt in a way that would not be a problem in the setback. The first is John Finch. He is one of the owners with PBG Builders in Goodlettsville, who has responded to Dan's offer by saying they would construct a new platform and a related privacy fence in a way that we really hope would be consistent with the code. And then another gentleman, Lillard Teasley, who is a structural engineer in town, has offered his firm's services to design the deck or platform. Rowan knows nothing about this. She's at school today, probably not terribly happy to be there after a nice Christmas break. But what I've come to do is explain that as the situation and ask for an indefinite deferral to allow the design work to be done and the pricing to take place so that we can get a new platform constructed, which will allow Rowan to use the exercise equipment that she uses on the platform, and she just generally enjoys being outside and being on that firm, steady surface. So what I request an indefinite deferral on the matter to allow the construction to take place and to have staff make all necessary inspections of the construction. Once completed, we'll obviously get the permits we need to do the work, and then if things go as we hope they will, and we think they will go well, the matter can be closed by staff at that point. So it's a cold day in Nashville, but there's some warm people who live in our city, and I'm happy to explain that to you.
No, thank you for that very moving story and your interest in Rowan. And She might get out of school early today because of the weather. Who knows? Waller Lanson, I know, is one of our top law firms in the city, and it sounds like you have quite a big practice. Or is this a pro bono client that you're doing?
We're not going to receive any money. Yes.
Well, it sounded that way. And Mr. Rose, you were also donating a lot of material for this too, and time.
Well, we're basically paying for the construction.
Wow. It's rare that we kind of get to thank people for their kindness to a neighbor, and I would like to, on behalf of the Board of Zoning Appeals, and hope that this will work out with this indefinite deferral, that you can get this constructed and kind of get within the law, so you don't even have to come back here. No, this is just a great story. So thank you for doing this. How old is Rowan, and what grade is she in?
She is 9, and she's a second grader.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yep. Does anybody else on the board have anything else to add? Mr. Herbert.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would suggest that once the demolition of the current deck structure that is in the setback, once that demolition has occurred, then the appeal then becomes moot, and we could withdraw it at that point in time. So once that demolition has occurred, then if the board would give me the authority, we would just administratively then withdraw the appeal, and this case is over.
Okay.
And I would ask Mr. Henry.
Do we have a motion to that?
I think Mr. Henry, would you like to be?
Mr. Henry, yes. Are you representing someone related to this?
I am.
Okay, well, please, yes, have a seat. And is that agreeable to you? Or
We'll make this real brief, yes.
Okay.
So Sean Henry, 315 Dedrick Street. I represent Miss May Boyce, sitting right behind me. She is the immediate next-door neighbor at 5011 Wyoming. And so this deck was built without a permit, and the property owner was cited into environmental court as an enforcement measure. Our only concern is that with an indefinite deferral, so long as the structure remains there, it could become an indefinite encroachment, an indefinite violation. So if the removal of the encroachment, the violation, can be cured within 30 days, whatever time frame is reasonable, then we have no objection to what's been presented here so far.
Okay, so we've heard from the neighbor whose property it's been encroached upon. So Mr. Herbert has said the deck is about to be removed. So I think, do you have?
Mr. Dunn, would you have any input as to how long you think it would take to do the demolition on the current deck to remove it from the setback?
Yeah, so I'll tell you that I'll live with any reasonable restriction. The people who are donating their time and services are fairly busy people. If we could have a bit more than 30 days, this has come together fairly quickly in the last 48 hours, and I know all these other gentlemen have other projects on which they work. So if we could particularly given the time of year where weather can be an interruption on work, if we could maybe have 60 days for the demolition to occur, I'm confident we could get it done in that period.
Okay. Mr. Henry.
60 days will be acceptable.
Okay. So we are going to do you have anything else? And once again, thank you again for your kindness and generosity. Mr. Henry, thank you for shepherding this too and coming to a reasonable agreement with the parties. So we're going to decide basically that we're going to accept their offer that this deck is going to be removed within 60 days. And then after that, they're going to work with Mr. Herbert to administratively come into an agreeable way that this can be approved by staff. Okay, that's my motion. Anyone have a second?
I second it, and I want to add to that we give Mr. authority to our director there to proceed as necessary.
Okay. And if there's nothing that needs to come back in front of us, it doesn't need to come back in front of us. Just proceed and get this settled. Motion's been made and properly seconded. Any more discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes. Thank you. Good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, John Michael, what's next?
Mr. Chairman, a similarly situated item, case number 2017-009 involving properties at 509 and I believe 511 Wedgewood is subject to a request for deferral, and the legal representative for the appellant, Mr. Joey Hargis, is here to present that request to the board.
Mr. Hargis, welcome back.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, as it was the board's policy during my tenure, I'd contacted John Michael and requested a deferral this week.
Okay.
And so come here and ask you, fill you in. I'm here representing Mr. Wiggs Thompson at the 2017-9, the case there on Wedgewood. We had our neighborhood meeting last night. I know Councilman Colby Sledge had sent an email opposed to the case. So we had our neighborhood meeting last night, a little later than I'd wanted to, given the holidays and arranging a place. Also, during my tenure, I remember this board wrote into their rules we had to have a neighborhood meeting in the neighborhood in which we're having the case, and that was securing space in the allotted time was not the best part. So we held our meeting last night. We had 8 folks show up, great conversation. Most folks answered questions. So I come to you today requesting a one-meeting deferral to give the neighbors a little more time. I believe the Planning Commission staff had written a recommendation of approval of our request, but just a little more time to let it sort of.
Is there anybody else today involved with this particular case? Present? Okay, seeing none. So you would like one meeting deferred? Okay, and let's defer it one meeting and put it as. Okay, we'll put it where it goes. Okay. So motion to defer it for one meeting.
I'll second.
Second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? It's deferred one meeting. Thank you. John Michael.
Mr. Chairman, as you know, this is the juncture in the meeting where we take a moment to recognize the elected officials who are present with us today. I know I've seen Councilmember Sam Coleman. I've seen Councilmember Kathleen Murphy there in the back of the room. I don't know if I see any others at the moment. In fact, pretty sure that I don't. We always afford this opportunity. If you would like to address the board at this point, it's totally appropriate. If you'd like to wait until some other case is on the agenda, that's fine. Whatever your preference might be. Mr. Coleman.
Councilman Coleman, welcome to BZA. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for
You can please identify yourself officially for the record.
For the record, I am Sam Coleman. I represent the 33rd District in beautiful Antioch, Tennessee. Glad to be before you. I haven't had a chance to be before this board since my return to the council. I am here on item 2017-001 on page 3, having to do with a variance that's requested. Just a bit of history before I go on and make the statement in which I would like to leave on. This is a piece of property that's situated between 2 streets, Old Hickory Boulevard and Laverne Couchfield, and it's in the middle of a neighborhood where we have surrounding home. The property owner have allowed in the past tenants to operate a rodeo kind of activity on the weekend, and this has brought a lot of concern from the neighbors. It has gone on for about 3 to 4 years, I know, even before I came back to council. Our last event happened in September after we got a stop and desist order. I understand that the neighbors did not actually, the tenants did not actually understand the rules, so they continue to go on. However, when this matter came up, neighbors have contacted me, and they wanted to come down to testify today, and I asked them not to allow me to come down and speak to you. We have not had a community meeting, and as I understand it, that's one of your rules, that you must have a community meeting. So I take from this that the owners of the property, along with the tenants, will contact me. We will set up a community meeting, give them an opportunity to explain to the neighbors what they would like to do in terms of using the property for a non-conforming use, variance, that is. So until we have that meeting, I ask that we defer this matter and allow the neighbors to have their input. I doubt very seriously the neighbors would agree to this. This activity has gone on for a number of years. The neighbors are fed up. I don't see them agreeing to it, but like always, I would grant everybody the opportunity to come before our community and explain their position, because we don't want to restrict anybody's property.
Do you have a certain amount of time you would wish this to be deferred?
Well, actually, I don't know what your rules would be. Normally, in council, it's usually deferred for one meeting. That is completely up on the applicant, because it's my understanding that the applicant should contact me. We have a bunch of community meetings already lined up, so I can tell you it won't be no time within the next 6 weeks.
With that, Mr. Chairman, I would note just from a staff perspective that it is often hard to get any kind of a community meeting lined up in the first 2 weeks. So pushing out to February the 2nd of 2017 BZA meeting, a good 4-week window, may be prudent.
Okay, would you like to go with the February meeting?
Well, I'm hesitant to say now because I don't want to speak for the property owners. They need to make the request with me, and we need
Yes.
to find room on our schedule.
Well, we could put it to the next meeting, and then if they change their mind, we can push it back, right?
Well, that's important to me, Mr. Chairman, because like most of us here, I am a lawyer, and I need to set my calendar, and so if we can defer it
We'd be happy
indefinitely.
to set your calendar right now.
Well, I mean, it's important. It's important, and I didn't want my neighbors to come down here filling up the room, testifying. I can do that for them. But I think that if rules will allow, if we can do it indefinitely, and as soon as that they have a date, then we can come back and set it. But I would hate to be trapped by a rule, particularly in the winter months like this.
John Michael, that term that comes up in the Metro Council hearings all the time, indefinite deferral, how do we handle that?
In short, it can be done. The idea here is you'll want to hear from the appellant, of course. Their wait for their hearing date should not be kept out to any unreasonable length, but if for some reason the board determines that it's not prudent to pin arbitrarily a date today, then it can be done indefinitely. They can reach out to our office
Chairman?
once they've had their meeting, and we can set it for the next available meeting.
Why don't we ask the appellant up and ask them what they want to do, and then, again, if they want to move it after we set it.
Okay, so you want to set it like one meeting or February?
Well, I'm saying, why don't we ask the appellant if they have a preference?
Yeah, and it's unusual because we usually ask elected officials to come and then we hear the case, but I can't imagine this board not respecting the council members' request to defer
Yes.
it. And so I think that given that it most likely will be deferred, I think it's highly appropriate to just ask the appellant to come up and say, your case is going to be deferred at least a month.
Okay.
And maybe 6
So
weeks.
let's hear from the appellant then.
And the appellant is Mr. Jose Gonzalez, the appellant, and then Michael Martin, owner of the property. If either Mr. Gonzalez or Mr. Martin is present, please come forward to address the board. Is there anyone present for case number 2017-001?
Okay, come forward.
Maxwell
Yes,
Road.
Yes. Yes. Are you Jose Gonzalez?
Yes, I am.
You guys can sit here. I'll move over.
Please identify yourself for the record and your address.
4057 Maxwell Road.
And what's your name?
Jose Gonzalez.
Okay, and you?
Jose Gonzalez Jr., I'm his translator.
Oh, okay, good. Did you understand what the council person said, that he's basically wants to have a meeting with the people that live around your property to discuss the use as a rodeo? And he wants to defer it until the time that they can meet to discuss whether he can support it or not.
Sí, he estado trabajando en eso, pues, en el meeting que tenían hoy.
He said he was working on that during the meeting that you guys had.
Okay, but so it sounds like we're going to defer this. So is there a date that?
Deferral meaning put it off to a later date?
Yes. So the question is, do you want it in 2 weeks or do you want it in in February?
Febrero, está bien.
February?
Okay.
Either the 2nd or the 16th.
It's either February 2nd or the 16th.
16.
16th, please.
Okay. Mr. Coleman, is
Well,
the 16th?
Well, Mr. Chairman, just for half a second, because I want to be clear on the rule. It was my understanding that if there hadn't been a community meeting, it was deferred by rule.
Yes.
And we don't have a date as
Yes.
for when the community meeting can be arranged, because we have to get a place. So if we're setting a definite date, how are we going to make sure that we have enough notice and time for the community to actually come out? Because it takes a 2-week period.
Mr. Chairman, from the staff perspective, that's up to the appellant. They'll do that, or if they come on the date and they've not done that, they don't get to be heard.
Right.
That's the way it's been
So
handled
they
in
get
every
to
other
kind of
instance for
invite
special
the
exception.
people, and if not, and if we come back on the 16th and they haven't had their meeting, then it gets deferred again.
Okay.
Okay? So, yeah, 6 weeks out, they should be able to do it. So I would like to, does anyone else have any questions about this?
I just need some clarity. Is it being deferred or proposed to be deferred until the middle of February?
February 16th, our meeting on the 16th. Any other comments? Okay. I would like to move that we defer this until February 16th to allow them time to have a community meeting and work with their council person, Sam Cole.
I'll second.
Okay. Motion's been made, properly seconded. Any more discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously, and they will be back on February 16th. Thank you for being here,
And
Councilman.
Thank you.
Thanks to Mr. Gonzalez Jr. for your help.
Yes,
Absolutely. Okay. Mr. Chairman, Councilmember Murphy is here also to address the board.
Welcome back to the BZA, Council Lady Murphy.
Thank you. I think I'm here every time y'all are.
Yes.
I'm going to address the other cases on your agenda in my district later. I just wanted to briefly talk about 2017-101, which is what I had asked to bump from consent. It is a bank in my district at the corner of 51st and Charlotte. You probably know it. It has a very large gold dome on top. Yes. And so, and I apologize that I didn't have time to reach out to the applicant over the holidays and things. And so we have talked, and I'm fine with it going back on consent. And we are going to have some upcoming conference calls and meetings, and hopefully get a neighborhood landmark overlay put on this, which I know that Historic has been interested in doing for a long time. And the right people have not been in the right room, evidently. So I'm excited that today I was able to maybe carrot and stick this and get this conversation going. So thank you all for allowing me that time to try to work that out.
This is a very Back to the Future case. I noticed on here it says the appellant is First American National Bank of Nashville. Not AmSouth, First American.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Which of course is Regents now after many buyouts. But I was looking for Georgie on the application. The older people that remember their little George Washington mascot from way back when.
I'll see if I can do something about that too for the future. But I appreciate them working with me and calling up to their leadership and agreeing to a handshake deal that we will get that ball rolling and hopefully be able to get that through. So thank y'all.
So we will put that on our consent agenda.
I'm happy to go do whatever y'all need to do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John Michael.
Mr. Chairman, you've provided a perfect segue into our discussion of the consent agenda. For members of the public, our board utilizes a consent agenda with its cases at each meeting. One board member reviews the record for each case prior to the hearings and identifies cases where appellants have met the criteria for their requested action. The reviewing board member determines that testimony in the case would not alter the material facts, then that individual case is recommended for the consent agenda and approval by the board. We will enter into the record those cases that have been recommended, and if anyone is here in opposition to any of the cases that I identify, please raise your hand so that we can remove the case from the consent agenda and then just have its hearing in the regular order. The first case recommended for consent is number 2017-004 for property located at 3831 Whites Creek Pike. Request for an amendment to the special exception, an existing historic home events location as properly permitted for use of a pavilion. Is there anyone here in opposition to case number 2017-004? Seeing none, the next case recommended is 2017-005, property at 201 Haverford, for an expansion of a legally nonconforming structure for a home addition. Is there anyone here in opposition to case number 2017-005? Seeing none, that case will be on the consent agenda. As just discussed, 2017-010, 5100 Charlotte, for a variance concerning the monument signage. Anyone here still wishing to speak in opposition to case number 010? Seeing none, the fourth and final item identified for the consent agenda is 2017-014 for property at 270 Venture Circle for signage variance at a new hotel. Is there anyone here in opposition to case number 014? Seeing none, Mr. Chairman, we would solicit a motion and vote on a consent agenda involving cases number 2017-004, 2017-005, 2017-010, and 2017-014.
Okay, those items are now moved to the consent agenda. Is there a second? Okay, motion's been made and properly seconded for the consent agenda. Any discussion about the consent agenda?
I have a discussion point, but first of all, Happy New Year, everyone.
Yeah.
There's a couple of cases I just didn't fully understand, so I'd like to abstain from voting, and I'll clarify, it didn't have to do with Councilwoman Murphy's case.
Which cases would you like to abstain from the consent agenda?
004 and 005.
004 and 005. So any other discussion about the consent agenda? So we are going to, let's take a vote on the entire consent agenda except 004 and 005. So all those in favor of the consent agenda minus 004 and 005, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. And now the consent agenda with items 004 and 005. Those in favor of those two items signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, and then we have one abstention. Okay.
With that having been passed, Mr. Chairman, an announcement for the audience. If your case has been approved on the consent agenda, you're done. You're welcome to stay. We're happy to have you, but you're certainly not obligated to stay for the duration of what promises to be a potential marathon Board of Zoning Appeals meeting. For those whose cases have been deferred or withdrawn, again, there will not be a hearing on those cases today. You're welcome to stay, but certainly not obligated. With that, Mr. Chairman, we'll proceed with the first case.
Okay.
Case 2016-113 involves the appellant, John Lott, and a request for an Item A appeal involving a property where there had been operation of a short-term rental without the legally required permit prior to operating as a short-term rental property. The highlighted property shown here on the zoning map gives an overview of the neighborhood. The aerial gives an even better picture of where we're dealing. If Mr. Lott would come forward to make his presentation to the board. Again, this is a property that was identified back in the summer for a permit application, but flagged as one having had operation at the property, reviews on the property, and yet not the required permit, hence the denial. Mr. Lott, or either Mr. Lott, are you present today? Mr. Chairman, unless you're seeing something I'm not, Mr. Lott is absent. This has been deferred multiple times. The board has options as to whether to defer it one meeting or choose to take definitive action and deny the application, thus giving the individual the opportunity to refile at a later date if he should wish.
Okay, so what's the will of the board here? We have a potential inclement weather day, but as John Michael referred to, this has been deferred. He knew that this was today. It's rare, as you know, that we have no-shows.
When was this first on our agenda? Do you remember?
Forgive me for not knowing the exact date. It was in the fall, perhaps at one of our October-November meetings, maybe one of the ones we had at the Madison Police Precinct.
Chairman, I'm prepared to move to deny the application.
I'll second that.
If we deny it, John Michael, can he reapply?
He would be permitted to reapply. Since it's an Item A case, not specific to like a site plan or an engineered plan, it's a little bit different than the traditional, you must come back with something different, if at all.
Okay.
And is there a time limit?
As far as how long you have to wait?
Yeah.
There's not one for how long he would have to wait. He could come down next week.
He could immediately apply again.
That's correct.
And since this is an Item A, he was denied a short-term rental permit. He doesn't have anything right now, so time does not favor him, and he can't do anything in the interim. So we've had a motion. It's been properly seconded. Any discussion about that? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? It is denied, and as John Michael said, the applicant is welcome to reapply again and pay the fee, I guess, too.
That's right. Mr. Chairman, continuing with the brisk pace, case 2016-136 involves property at 1234 Antioch Pike. This, too, is a case that the board has seen previously. Mr. Kurt Richards is the owner and appellant for this case. Mr. Richards, if you'd come forward at this point. Quick overview for the board. The zoning map shows you the industrial area along Antioch just above Harding Pike off of I-24. The request that originally came to you involved 3 variance requests. The board approved the first 2. What remains is a question of a sidewalk variance. The highlighted property identified here in the aerial photo is now demolished. However, the permitted construction, I believe, is underway. Mr. Richards, is that correct for some components?
No, not at this time.
Not yet. Just the demo is done. Very well.
Yes, sir.
The site plan submitted demonstrates the proposed layout of the warehouse and workspace for Mr. Richards' company. And as the blue skies suggest, these photographs were made quite some time ago, Mr. Chairman, showing the face of the property in the upper left, the view across the street in the lower right, and then the current view up and down Antioch Pike here on this next slide. Is there any opposition present for case number 2016-136? Seeing none present, the appellant will have 10 minutes to make the desired presentation to the board with regard to the sidewalk variance. Mr. Richards.
Yes, my name's Kurt Richards. I'm the owner of the property. Just requesting a sidewalk variance due to the fact there's a future right-of-way that's, I guess, undetermined, or that was the reason I first came in, to push the building back, and there's no other sidewalks on that street. So I'm requesting a variance from doing it or pushing it to a later date for the sidewalks.
Okay. Any questions of the applicant?
Okay,
Yes.
I was not clear on what the hardship is that would prohibit you from building the sidewalk.
Well, at this point, I don't know where you would build the sidewalks, because I guess there's an expansion, a future expansion coming through. I don't know if it's a bike lane or a widening of the road. So if that's the case.
Basically, the city, if it's the city right-of-way, I guess, the city has left an option open in the future. As you could see, this is a very industrial area, and you see all those 18-wheelers there, but this is a 2-lane highway. So the city has basically said, well, we probably need to expand this sometime. They don't know when, but they're leaving that option open. And so he's saying, I don't want to build a sidewalk next to the road if the city's going to come along and expand this.
That's the only variance, correct?
Yes, because in the previous case, we dealt with. Any other questions of the applicant, or do you have anything else to add?
No, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, let's close the public hearing. Discussion.
I want to make a comment.
Yes.
I travel this street very regularly, and I will be greatly surprised if it doesn't get widened, because it's got a tremendous amount of traffic coming off Haywood Lane, off of I-24 and up to Harding. And I really do appreciate his comment that, why build it when there's probably likelihood it'll be torn up, because that street will definitely be on the list for being widened, I would imagine.
Okay.
Well, I can appreciate that too, but there's a lot of people who are building in Nashville who are required to dedicate right-of-way to Metro for widening sidewalks. And so I feel a little uncomfortable not, allowing the variance, but I don't know if something can be worked out that it be built in the future after the right-of-way or after the road is expanded.
I think that's just so far off in the future. Let's ask our zoning administrator, it's either kind of up or down, isn't it, with these sidewalk variances? We can't say you have to build it in 2 years or whenever the...
I don't know how we would ever enforce that, Mr. Chairman, so I think it's either kind of an up or down situation.
I kind of lean toward allowing the variance because it, for the reasons that Alma had said and the appellant that we're always caught with this question of if somebody got to start it, here's the one that may start it, but I think to me the trigger on that question is what's the likelihood of the rest falling through. I mean, is the big warehouse next door going to have any reason to put in a sidewalk at any point in the foreseeable future before the potential road widening? If the road were widened, is that a time when the city would come in and potentially have a sidewalk project that would apply to the whole street? And I think it's a case-by-case basis, and in this particular case, it seems that the appellant arguments to me win the day, and I think that the variance is probably okay, being very sensitive to the overarching question of when do we require sidewalks and when do we not, and who gets a variance and who doesn't.
I would just like to add that we do have a recommendation to deny from planning because according to planning, the setback is not affected by the sidewalk or the future expansion as I read it. And while it is an industrial zone, planning's point is, we're looking 25 years down the road. So I would just point that out to the extent that we all want to keep in mind that recommendation as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I understand that because, normally when we build sidewalks, they're right next to the actual street. So I don't see how you can build a sidewalk and then they expand this 2 lanes and that not be over the sidewalk.
I'm not sure that they're always next to the street. There's a movement to put a green buffer between the street
But
and the
usually that's
sidewalk.
an 8-inch buffer. What's the curb and gutter?
I don't think it's bigger.
According to planning's report, which Ms. Chappell just referenced, the MCSP requirements for Antioch Pike are a 6-foot wide grass strip and 8-foot wide sidewalk at this location.
6 foot. But that's still smaller than a lane of traffic.
Smaller than a lane of traffic.
Well, and this is an area where somebody's not going to be going to buy their groceries and walk back home. I can't even imagine anyone having any reason to walk in that area. If it were a neighborhood, I'd be all over it. Yes, we need sidewalks. But this is a very heavy industrial area, and as the appellant has said, there are no sidewalks no one else has sidewalks there.
You can see at the bottom of the picture that looks like a storage facility, one of the rental places with many, many bays and booths. So this is very industrial.
Is there still a provision in the zoning code to pay into the sidewalk bank? I don't know if I'm referring to that correctly.
John Michael,
there is such a thing.
Let's talk about the BZA's power and the sidewalks variance and what we can do and what we can't do. We basically, it's up or down. We can't say go pay to the sidewalk.
It's correct that the board cannot direct or order an appellant to utilize that option, but the appellant has that option. If, for example, the board were to deny this variance request today, then the obligation rests with the appellant. He would then go forth and either build the sidewalks as required by the law or take advantage of the option under the zoning code to participate with the, in lieu of, or the sidewalk fund as it's called, so that sidewalks would be built elsewhere within that general area for the benefit of the community, just not at this particular location. That being the concept anyway.
As far as treating it as a hardship, I would also, it's easy to think about these as lines on a drawing. I'm an architect, and that's generally how I think of these, But in the real world application, even if the new sidewalk were at the very edge, with the appellant, if he built a sidewalk that started at the edge of the right-of-way on his property, the new construction would very likely destroy or tear up part of the sidewalk and would be replaced by the city, but it would still be damaging what he potentially could be damaging for rainwater or for utilities being relocated. So it's not necessarily the fact that it could be in the right-of-way, but if it's at the right-of-way or close to the right-of-way or partially in the right-of-way, it's very likely that the sidewalk would be damaged and have to be replaced in construction. So it's not just a matter of coming in and putting down new pavement on the grass. We're not painting pavement. There's actually a lot of disruption that would go on in the construction.
When we widen roads, we take those big, heavy equipments that tear up the road.
Right, especially if there's utility relocation. You're going to be disturbing a lot more than the right-of-way potentially.
Okay. Any other discussion? Do I hear a motion from anyone?
I'll move that we grant the variance because because the appellant has met the requirements for a variance under Section 17.20.060G.
And I would like to amend that potentially that because the sidewalk would be located very close to the right-of-way, if not, in the right-of-way, the potential area where it would be, not the sidewalk would be in the right-of-way, but it would be in the footprint where an expansion of the roads would be and possibly be torn up anyway. Is that acceptable? Okay. Motion second. Any more discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, it passes 5-2.
The next case to be heard by the board is 2016-177 for Joseph and Constance Mielke, appellants and owners of the property located at 1007 Trice Drive. The request is for a variance from street setback requirements for placement of a fence. The board has seen this case previously, though not in a full hearing. This was the one, of course, that was determined by Public Works to be a fence that was built into the right-of-way, and therefore something that the board could not offer relief upon. However, the request for a variance to move it out of the right-of-way into some other area that doesn't meet the base zoning code but would require a setback variance can be heard by the board. This is that request today. The zoning map shown here in the R6 section over in the Nation shows you the corner property there at Trice. The aerial shows you a little bit of the neighborhood. Site visit photos indicate the condition of the current fence, approximately 6 feet tall, just into the right-of-way. The views up and down each of the cornered streets there shown on this final slide from the site visit, which again, as you can tell from the clear skies, has been a while now. Is there anyone here in opposition to case number 2016-177? Seeing none, the appellants will have 10 minutes to make the desired presentation. And Mr. Chairman, if you give me half a moment, they've submitted a PowerPoint presentation, which I'll take a moment to load up.
You said I'd just say next for you to flip the slides. She's going to be speaking for us, and I'll just say next.
Okay. While we're waiting, please everyone identify themselves for the record.
I'm Joanna Harris. I'm the property owner's advocate
And
at 1007 Trice Drive.
Okay.
My name's Constance Mielke, and I'm the property owner at 1007 Trice Drive.
Okay.
Joseph Mielke, 1007 Trice Drive.
Okay, very good. So John Michael, just to kind of clear things up, when this was on our agenda last meeting, there was a, comment that this might have been
And then
built.
F5, you may know that, I apologize.
It might have been built in the right-of-way, and in fact, it was. So remind us again what we were doing today.
You're determining whether or not the fence can be moved back to a place that still doesn't meet zoning code and thus would require a variance from the setbacks.
So tell us, for this type of fence, how far back does it require?
Forgive me, I don't have the file in front of me at the moment as I was just loading this in. I believe the required setback on a fence would be 10 feet, and it's one of these sliding scale scenarios where you can have a fence right at your property line if it is 30 inches tall.
Yeah.
And I believe that even has to be not an opaque fence. But the true privacy fence has to get off the setback considerably. The documents are likely in your case file that explains where those need to be.
And currently, right now, it's in the setback, not even on the property line. So, this tall a fence would have to be under the code at least 10 feet back. Is that what you're saying?
At least that. And so the idea ultimately is everybody's acknowledged, most notably the appellant has acknowledged, okay, we cannot have the status quo. The question before the board is what can they have outside of the black letter of the zoning code?
Okay. So.
And John Michael, did you ask if there was opposition?
I did.
Yes, no opposition.
No opposition. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Are we ready to proceed? John Michael, are we ready to proceed? Okay, let's go.
Since we already we'll just start right on in with the hardship focus areas. We're going to be looking exactly at that the hardship wasn't self-imposed. Because this case, as John Michael said, is non-conforming and non-complying. We know this already. So we want to focus on these areas to try to compel the board to allow a variance for this fence. I'd like to begin by talking about that the hardship was not self-imposed because there was no deliberate intent to break the law. The construction of the fence began with the rat infestation on the property.
Next, please, John Michael. I'm sorry.
Although rats do not pose an immediate threat, there are adverse effects. that compose issues. These issues are brought on by it's called a brown rat. That's what we have here in Nashville. They actually live in colonies of 100. They also can be up to 19 inches long, and they can be as big as 30 ounces. They can squeeze through holes smaller or as small as the size of a quarter. They're also known to cause extreme damage to property and food. The health and fire hazards that come about from a rat infestation with the feces and urine can have a great impact because the urine and feces poses a risk to one of our most vulnerable populations, which are the children. Rats spread diseases and viruses known to trigger asthma and allergies. The whole premises of the fence began when the homeowners had a rat infestation. They have 2 young grandchildren in the home. It scared them. They called rat control next, and they had them remove the feces and urine with alpha enzymes and traps. They also cleaned up to prevent any more rat infestations, and they were advised to seal up holes and build barriers. Animal pros actually told the homeowners that it would be in their best interest to build a wood fence. This is when the homeowners next decided to look further into the fence requirements. When they did so, next, they look at the slide that you see on your left. That's what they pull up on your internet site, which did not differentiate between an interior lot or a corner lot. When the homeowners looked at this figure, they looked at the figure and they assumed that that lot line that you see with the dotted line abuts the street. So they assumed that where the original chain link fence was, they already met that variance of having a fence, and they were already on the property line. This diagram made them think that, yeah, that's right, the lot line and the street abut, because this can be very misleading. It wasn't until the homeowners got a code violation that they realized that there was a differentiation between a corner lot and a interior lot. But once again, even on this diagram that you see, it appears that the lot line abuts the street. So the homeowners did not intentionally break the law. When they did the fence instruction next, they built it 1 foot back from the original chain link fence. They also used pressure-treated wood that abuts the ground. And in their mind, it was greater than 10 feet from the roadway because of the diagram. Unfortunately, this was not deliberate. There is no permit required for a fence. There's also, it's very easy to misinterpret complex requirements. There are misleading figures of compliance. And we would like to show that this fence does not pose a public safety and welfare risk to the community. We're going to do so by, I'm going to skip the physical characteristics of the property because Mr. Michael already showed you that. I'm going to skip that. I'm going to go straight to the petition results. I decided with the petition results that it would be best because anybody can read a bunch of signatures and you don't really know what that means. So I wanted to put it in graph form so you could see what it means. And you can see that 28% of the people, the 25 signatures that signed the petition feels as though there's no obstruction of the view. Next.
Next.
25 total signatures were on the petition. 68% of these 25 signatures were the West Park Addition residents. 32% were nearby District 20 residents. And 57% of those people felt as though there was no obstruction. There was what I would consider 44% inconclusive comments if you consider that the fence is pretty, if they made a comment such as that nature, or if I consider the 12% that did not make a comment at all in the 44%. Justification that the fence does not pose a risk to public welfare and safety also came from the Public Works determination, where the street services superintendent, next, Mr. Herbert King, said that if the fence was moved back onto the property line, that there would be proper sight distance and safe for cars to pull out as long as the Milkies did not park their vehicles between the fence and the roadway. I'm going to demonstrate with you on the next slide the exact site plan and the request of Mr. King, the superintendent, that feels as though that the fence will be, by moving it back, it's going to eliminate the site restriction. He wants to move it back next 1 foot on the Trice Drive section. If you look at the large poster, you can see highlighted in the poster that shows the exact area where Mr. King suggested that the fence be moved back to the property line. Next, the next area is at Carl Place, where Mr. King suggested that the fence be moved back to the property line to 3 feet. Next. Therefore, what we are requesting is we're requesting a front setback of 10 foot from the property line with the height to remain at 6 feet. We would also have to ask for a 3.5 foot height variance for the off of the right-of-way fence to remain on the property line with a total of 6 feet. This area is not a main thoroughway. Next. The fence does not interfere with the interests of the public safety and welfare of the community, as demonstrated by the petition, street services determination, and the physical characteristics of the property. The Milkies did not set out to intentionally break the law, but to protect their family. There is no permit required for a fence. The diagrams are misleading, which led to misinterpretation of the law. The hardship was not self-imposed. Therefore, we would like to ask the board to give us a variance of 10 foot and 3.5 for the height of the fence.
Yeah, I have a question. You raised the issue of rats because, and how it ties to the fence because of, I think, dogs. You didn't mention dogs in your verbal presentation, but it was in your written presentation. So basically it was to allow your dogs to run free in the yard to protect the property from.
Can I answer that?
Yes, ma'am.
Whenever we first initially decided to construct this fence, we did have a rat infestation, and also with my dogs, I was trying to focus more on the health issue of why really and truly the fence, we decided to put the fence up. We had a chain link fence, and when the Animal Pros was there cleaning everything out, I spent almost $15,000 on that. When they were cleaning out from under my house, they were literally watching rats run back and forth through the chain link fence between our property and other properties around us, because there is a severe rat problem in our area with all the construction going on. Plus my dogs, I have an older dog. people that walk their dogs, they come up to the fence, they let their dogs fight through the fence with my other dogs. I've been able to turn my dogs loose. That's another advantage to having the privacy fence. But the rats were the initial construction of the fence.
And so it sounds like that because the fence was built over the property line, you're going to have to move the fence.
Yeah,
And so the question I have is, it's highly unusual to have a 6-foot fence in someone's front yard. I also recognize that your yard is highly unusual and that you don't have a backyard.
No.
And so I understand that, and that's something that I know the board will talk about. But why is it important if you have dogs to scare away to drive away the rats? Why does the fence have to be a solid fence? Why can't it have some opening as most fences do in the front yard?
With rats can jump and hit you in the chest, and this is what I was told by animal pros. The 2.5 feet, I don't have a backyard, and when we constructed it, it just was, it was partly because of the rats and partly because, it was just symmetrical. It all lined up, it all matched all the way around. It was to deter the rats because rats can jump. They can climb 2.5 feet. If I've got an opening at the top of it, all they got to do is come right over the fence. With it down in the ground and with it taller, a lot of times a rat is going to hit it and only goes so far, and then it's going to go away. They're not going to just continually climb 6 feet to try to get over it to get in. Obviously, my dogs didn't do a job with the rats because I had rats, and I've had my dogs ever since I lived there. The dogs did not deter the rats. The rats came with the dogs in the yard.
I actually think the dog food attracts them.
Yeah, and I have to feed my dogs,
But let me add something here as well. The homeowners have seen a reduction in the rat population in their yard because of the fence of because of the construction of this fence, because Animal Pros still has the animal traps that are underneath their home.
And they've caught zero.
And it proves to them that all those nasty things, as I say, are not coming back in, that they've properly sealed them out. And what's ironic, and I've been told that we can't really talk about other properties, but what's ironic is the property next door, we found out, has had to call rat infestation people too, because now I guess they decided to go on over to their house.
And when I've come home, I have seen the rats trying to get in up under the fence, and they can't, and they run around the fence trying to find openings.
We didn't intentionally do this. We really didn't. We've worked in construction. We assumed we were on our property because of the chain link. We went behind the chain link, and somebody came, we got the code violation, and that's when we realized, I didn't know it had to be 2.5 feet tall, because I've seen other fences that are like ours. In our neighborhood. And, we didn't intentionally do this. Nobody wants this headache. I've cried over this fence. I have.
Okay, you say that rats can jump up to 2.5 feet.
No, rats can jump up to your chest. They can hit, if they are on the ground, they can run and jump and pop you in your chest.
So how many feet is that?
I'd say 4 foot, 4'6".
4.5, something like. An average man is around 6 foot tall, and a rat can jump up to probably the chest height of an average man.
That's what the rat expert.
That's what the people at Animal Pros said to us.
So the other question is, you list on this conclusion about hardships not self-imposed physical, but what is your hardship that you need a 6 foot tall fence in the front yard?
I don't want rats anymore, and also for my dogs. I haven't had any. I've been able to take my dogs off.
So, obviously the dogs could be in a area with a open fence or normal kind of fence.
Yeah, the hardship is I can't afford another $15,000. I have grandchildren that live with me.
With asthma.
And the one grandson that has the asthma, before we did get rid of the rats, he was in and out of the hospital, had to have a breathing machine. After I got rid of the rats and we don't have them anymore, he hasn't had any issues with his asthma. And I mean, that's the truth on that.
Okay. Any other questions? Do you have anything? You have 5 seconds left. Is there anything else?
I want to add that this isn't on a main thoroughway either. There's very limited traffic on this.
Dead end in a circle.
And the neighbors around us don't have a problem with it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank
We're
you.
going to close the public hearing discussion. So let me ask John Michael again. Tell us the rules of fences and why we have them.
Fences are considered permitted setback obstructions under 17.12.040 Metropolitan Code of Law, specifically the zoning code. It's correct to state, and I know that this has sometimes created heartburn for our board, permits are not required for privacy fences. However, if you're going to take the liberty of building a privacy fence, you've got to meet the code requirements with regard to height, setback, materials, et cetera. Although it is a permitted setback obstruction, that permission comes with certain criteria. Here we go. 17.12.040.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. And since a lot of people don't realize this, since there's not a permit required, there's no inspection as the process goes through. With everything else that requires a permit, you have to submit drawings and they get approved before you build. So with fences, it's you sort of if you mess up, you don't sometimes know until someone reports you or something like that. There's no stop gaps in between. It's you go until you're busted.
And you've identified exactly the sequence that most of these cases come to you at the board, and that is property standards is sent out. Yes, there's something that's either too tall, too far in the right-of-way, or in this case, or in the setback, in this case, in the right-of-way, and that's how we came to know about it, and it's what brings the appellants here. The applicable section of law, Mr. Chairman, because I know you'd prefer to hear a little bit of that, 17.12.040 is other setbacks. E, permitted setback obstructions. 26, screening wall or fences, gives us the criteria for a 6-foot in height restriction within the remainder of the required front setback. Can you have a fence within the front setback? Yes, as long as it's 6 feet in height or less. And then 8 feet in height within the required side or rear setback within any platted common open space. And that's sometimes more applicable in other properties. 2.5 feet right out to the property line is fine. That's just not what's before you by way of request. So ultimately, it's a consideration of whether or not to grant a variance on the height and the placement.
Or an open fence, too.
Right.
So open fence, you get to go higher.
I think that's the idea here. But again, that's the applicable section for the board's consideration in terms of determining whether they need it.
So the applicant has asked for a variance on the street setbacks of the fence. So we're here to determine whether that's going to be granted or not.
Well, conceptually, putting a 6-foot fence on the property line in a front yard is very troubling. But when you get to just on paper, but when you get to the reality of this specific situation, it seems to have a whole lot of characteristics that are extremely unique. It's a very unusual lot. There is no, in terms of house placement, and it's a corner lot with no backyard.
John Michael, can you put the picture up again of the front of the house and the fence?
Often on fences, we talk about public safety and have Public Works, weigh in. Is it an issue? It certainly appears that that's not an issue in this case, that it's met that measure. I think that our measure for public, impact on public welfare, a lot of that relies on neighbors. And in this case, we have no neighborhood opposition that I don't recall any in the packet, but also there's no physical presence of opposition and substantial neighborhood support. So, the neighbors either clearly recognize the problem or appreciate what the neighbors or what the homeowners are trying to do. So, those are 3 factors that I think are very unique to this piece of property. Although, I said it's a tough call to just say, let's put a fence like this in what is essentially a front yard.
I agree, and I've seen tall fences in front yards. Granted, they're probably 10 feet away from the property line, but I mean, I've seen tall fences in yards, so I would be inclined to vote in favor, given the hardship.
So the other thing that we need to determine, if you're in agreement of the variance, is right now, as it stands, this is in the right-of-way. So where do you want the fence?
Well, no, we don't have a right to allow them to have a fence on the right-of-way. They have to move the fence, as they stated, and they're asking to move it to the property line, which is further from the road than this. And this is, I think their property line is further from the road than many property lines are. So I do think that if we pass this, that there should be a condition that the homeowners don't park in a spot that Public Works deems unsafe for them to park their cars, which they've agreed to. But the property line.
So Public Works has said what?
They just said for them not to park kind of around that corner.
On the other, between the fence and the road?
Yeah.
Where that white truck is.
What about?
Parked into there.
That side, he said.
What about the other side?
The other side he said was fine.
He said the other side was fine, and we're slowly getting rid of cars so that we don't have any additional cars. The Cadillac's already gone. The blue car's fixing to be gone. There will only be the white truck, the blue truck, and our PT Cruiser, and my daughter is going to pull up where the mailbox
public
is.
hearing, so
We
it's
will
like-
not park on
Okay.
that side over there.
Okay,
that was clarification. Thank you.
Okay, yes.
I was going to suggest, could it be, if a motion's made to approve, could it be just easier to rely on Public Works recommendations and not us try to interpret it?
Public Works might be less generous, shall I say.
Yeah, I thought they had been out there and approved some locations and.
Oh, Public Works did? Okay.
Yeah.
John Michael.
Mr. Chairman, of note, Public Works' primary interest is the visibility triangle there at the intersection. So you may know that from Mr. King's notes and the emails he sent to our staff explaining his position, his primary concern is just get it out of the right-of-way and make sure it's safe to navigate that intersection. His concerns have nothing to do with the zoning code and its parameters. Mr. King has no responsibility to look at the zoning code and doubtless has not done so in this instance. That comes to our staff and then upon appeal to this board. So in the same way that the board contemplates maybe we just rely on Public Works is completely relying on zoning staff from the Codes Department and now the board to look at its issues.
So could we ask the homeowner to present, either a site plan or a map to you all basically, how do we get Public Works to say, do they stake it off? How do we get them to say, yeah, we're cool with this?
I think you sort of have that, and it's just that their threshold is very low.
Okay.
As long as they're a foot away from the right-of-way into the interior of the property and preserve the visibility triangle, then Public Works will be happy. At least that's what I gleaned from the
From
correspondence.
the right-of-way means a foot inside the property line, or?
A foot closer in than where they are.
Yeah, basically.
Oh, well, the public hearing is closed. We're just discussing. So, does that answer basically it sounds like Public Works cares about the sight line near the white truck, and that's pretty close to the property line, obviously not in the right-of-way. So do we have a motion about this, or want more discussion?
I want to add that we have a code that we normally comply with, and I hear no hardship here. So that's my point.
I think if I were going to find a hardship, I think I would quote the ever-popular Herbert clause. Could you quote that for us, Mr. Herbert? The exact language of that?
The catch-all clause.
Any other exceptional or unusual circumstance.
I would be willing to
a rat
grant
infestation.
the rat infestation and it seems to impose de minimis harm to to their neighbors. If someone making a motion would care to use that.
So are you implying that a 6-foot fence will keep rats out of property?
I don't know what will keep rats out of a property, but if we're looking for a hardship to to hang our hat on. I think that's really the only thing we could do. I don't think that any of the other categories would work. I'm agreeing with you, but I'm also trying to find a way that because we can't approve the variance without finding a hardship. So if we are to do that, I would think that's our. I don't think we have to say the rat infestation. I think that we can just say that it's unusual and extraordinary situation.
Does anyone want to make a motion?
I'm willing to make a motion that we grant both the height variance and the location variance as described today, which is back to the property line, with any recommendations followed by Public Works based upon the issues discussed about creature infestation and the attendant health issues there too being a exceptional circumstance that would qualify as a basis for the variance.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion's been made and properly seconded. Any more discussion? Seeing none, those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Passes 6-1. So what we're going to do is you're going to talk to John Michael tomorrow or next week about how to move this fence and where, and Public Works is going to be involved in the location on that side by the white truck, okay? So what we've ruled today is you can keep the height of the fence and you could keep the general location of the fence close to the property line. So good luck with everything.
Mr. Chairman, our next case is 2016-190 involving property located in the Sylvan Park neighborhood at 132 46th Avenue North, shown here on the zoning map. The appellant, Mr. Mike Irwin, has filed the Item A appeal challenging the zoning administrator's determination with regard to an interpretation of the SP language as to closing time regarding the businesses located within this retail property. The aerial here, now dated obviously, shows the construction underway at that intersection. And then the recent site visit shows the appearance just from the street level. Because there are a number of folks who wish to address the board on both sides of the issue, the parties will have 15 minutes. As a courteous reminder to all who wish to speak today, the 15 minutes is cumulative. You do not get, each of you, 15 minutes. Because I've got diapers to change
John
tonight.
Michael, before we start.
I just wanted to ask John Michael, if you would, I am going to have to leave at 3:25, and to the extent that it may matter if there's an equal number of board members, if you could just talk about how the voting is counted and what it takes to carry a motion.
Sure. 4 affirmative votes will carry a motion, whether that be in favor of whether that be in favor to support the Item A appeal or to reject the Item A appeal. 4 votes will be necessary regardless of whether there are 7 members present or 4 members present. I think that's clear, and certainly I think some of the folks here are represented by counsel who can explain it to you perhaps even more capably. Again, I've stated the overview of the appeal. Mr. Chairman, I believe your normal procedure is to hear from the zoning administrator, since it is an Item A appeal, as to what the determination was and why it was. Although I know you have a letter in the file, that would give you a good jumping off point for the appellant.
Mr. Herbert, why are we here?
I'll just stand by the letter that's in the file.
Okay. That was easy.
It's brief.
Okay. Very good. So let us proceed. John Michael.
Yeah, Mr. Irwin or his representative.
Okay.
Hi, I'm David Kleinfelter. I do represent the appellants here. I'm 424 Church Street, Reno and Kavanaugh firm. We have several people that are going to speak. We've tried to coordinate it and get it done snap. So it'll be some neighbors, and then Jason Holloman, who was the councilman at the time and knows about the intent of the legislation when it was adopted, will speak at the end. Start by saying the opinion doesn't sound outrageous on the face of it. You've seen the letter. Some of you may say, well, that makes sense. But there's at least 2 reasons that you should need to grant this appeal. The first is that it doesn't take into account the history, the legislative history behind the SP. And the second is it actually adds some uncertainty in ways that it's a Pandora's box. I don't think you want to go down that path. Prior to 2013, this property had 2 residential lots and an old commercial building with CN zoning. Former council member Jason Holloman worked with the owner and neighbors to adopt what is now the SP. There's always a case there's trade-offs. In this case, the owner received the right to build an additional residential house. Those houses all face Utah now, and they also received an additional 1,900, almost doubling the commercial square footage on this property. In exchange, there were restrictions. So the neighborhood and everybody had certainty. They got a lot of extra development rights in exchange for the restrictions. And that's exactly what an SP is for. Per the zoning code, an SP is intended to be context-sensitive development. So the context is important here. You've got this one little spot of neighborhood center policy. Actually, that policy was adopted at the same time as the SP. Everything else is what's known as neighborhood maintenance, which basically means what it says. It's supposed to stay like a neighborhood. So the context is this is not a commercial area. This isn't that area down around, Edley's and all the other stuff. This is up off the street. It is an urban neighborhood, and the neighbors knew there was going to be something commercial there, but it's in a restaurant right on the edge of a residential neighborhood with a parking lot literally in the backyards. In this context, Jason worked with the owner and the neighbors on the SP. It's proposed and it allows multiple commercial uses. They discussed the uses. Jason agreed that a restaurant could be acceptable, but again with limited hours. Initially, they asked for hours that said to prohibit the operations after 9 p.m. Developer said, well, what if we got employees here? They actually originally were going to have Dozen Bakery in this location. The bakers may need to get there at 4 a.m. because it was between 6 and 9. And so they said, that's fine. The bakery was good. But so they changed the language from prohibit operations, and this is really the most important point, to shall not be open to the public after 10 p.m., with the intent being that if you're there working, cooking, who hasn't worked at a restaurant at some point, and washing down the tables and stuff, that's okay. The public is to be gone at 10 p.m., period. That was understood by the council member, understood by the neighbors, debated at length. That was an essential alternative development standard, which is what an SP is for. When the Planning Commission debated this, they were very, very concerned about the parking. It wasn't even a unanimous vote to approve the SP because they didn't want another 12th South problem. You have a fairly small parking lot, a 100-seat restaurant, so the issue was limiting the noise and the parking that's going to accumulate from the public. So the public will be gone at 10 p.m. When the property was sold, the new owner came in and understood that. The new owner met with neighbors, said, I understand the existing zoning. Then a new restaurant operator came in and met and said, hey, I need to stay open till 11 p.m. And I want to make sure you're not going to kick people out right at 11:01. There's emails that show that. June met with the neighborhood and they said, hey, we want to do that, extend it to 11. And then there was even an application filed at the planning department to amend the SP. Then a request was made to the zoning administrator after the owner proposed some language, ran it by, it was voted on by some members of the neighborhood. There was, I think, 33 to 18, so not that much what I'd call an overwhelming vote, where they said, hey, okay, we're okay with this language. So the owner presented it, said, I want to modify the SP to use this language. Presented it, and the zoning administrator took the language that the owner requested and was approved by the neighborhood and put it in, and that's the letter you have. That is the language that the owner requested as a modification. And I'm assuming, of course, the zoning administrator probably didn't know all the history behind how this got to be and all the debate with Jason and the owner and everyone else. But the point is, if you're going to change the intent of a piece of legislation like this, that's what the council is for. So it's not like this owner is being told, no, you can never do this, but it needs to be done legislatively, not administratively, by either the zoning administrator or by this board. They came in, the SP was in place, they knew that, only open to the public until 10 to address those noise concerns. And it's important also that this property, that's the issue with the history. Also, though, this property is zoned for multiple commercial uses. Does that mean when somebody comes in with another commercial use that the zoning administrator is going to have to give another opinion? Because this one talks about finishing meals. What if it's a day spa? So you're going to come in for the 9:45 appointment. It's a 2-hour appointment, and then you leave at 11:45. So there's all kinds of problems with that. Also, just with the restaurants. Let's say it's a family-style restaurant or something where they have seatings at 6, 8, and 9:50. They're going to be there well past 10 o'clock at that point. Plus, they're seeking a beer permit. So, you come in, go with our friends, go down and watch a couple basketball games, grab a burger, but you get there at 9:50 and you're watching the West Coast games. It's going to be midnight before you know it. It's just, here's the issue. It adds uncertainty. So you look at this thing, it said 10 p.m. is when it's open to the public on the property. And now we have this, however long it takes to finish the meals. It just opens it up for many, many things. And a general rule is you interpret legislation to add certainty. Let's say that we know that there are various other rules in the code. Construction noise has to end at a certain time. Well, I had to start my concrete pour, 20 minutes before the time, and I got to finish it. So it'll just take me another 2 or 3 hours. Don't worry about it. These times mean something. This time in this means something. You may ask the zoning administrator and others, I was a little surprised the code doesn't frankly say anything about what operating hours or those various things mean. So in this case, you have to look at what that was intended by the council member when it was adopted. And finally, you will hear that I think that the neighborhood association, like I said, approved this. None of that matters. That's things that have happened after the fact. This isn't a variance, as you know, where you're being asked to sort of work something out. You're being asked to interpret, well, read the zoning administrator's interpretation and see if you agree that that's what it meant. And based on the history and the uncertainty that it adds, we ask you to grant the appeal and I guess it's called overruling. I'm not sure exactly what it's called, but disapprove the zoning administrator's interpretation.
Hi, thank you very much for taking the time to listen to our position on the interpretation of SB 2013-469. My name is Mike Irwin. I live at 4506 Utah, which, as a matter of reference, is across Utah Avenue from this development. I've been involved since day one. As a matter of history, this troubled spot zone development has been problematic since the very beginning. We are all ready for a successful business to open this site as long as it does so under the guidelines of the SB, which we spent so much time, 12 to 18 months, negotiating and hammering out and making compromises. We also clearly understand this is an urban neighborhood and welcome any new tenants who abide by the SP. The current property owner bought this property with clear knowledge of the protections afforded by the SB. The reasonable hours of operation were in exchange for us granting the developer greatly expanded commercial space and one additional residential lot, as pointed out by David. Now we're being asked to sacrifice the quality of life in our residential area of our children and families so the potential tenants and people who do not live nearby can use this development. We respectfully request the board to uphold this appeal to protect our neighborhood and our families. Thank you very much.
Yes, good afternoon, board members. I'm Bernard Pickney. I live at 4604 Dakota Avenue, and I've been involved in planning and zoning issues in a neighborhood since I joined the neighborhood association more than 30 years ago. And I've attended every meeting about this particular site over the last 4.5 years, and, you know, there was clear agreement that, you know, the business would have 16 hours a day to operate and the neighbors would have 8 hours of peace and quiet. And, you know, this opinion letter changes that, makes it very uncertain. It takes a very specific, easy to enforce criteria and makes it so vague that it's unenforceable. So anyway, that's why we're here for an appeal. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Shauna Graham. I live at 4510 Nebraska Avenue. My home is immediately adjacent to this commercial property. And each of you is getting a copy of an email that was sent to Mr. Herbert on October 11th from the property owner, Mr. Jim Jacobs. And in that email, Mr. Jacobs states that the Sylvan Park Neighborhood Association voted in favor of some new language, and then he asks the planning director, Mr. Sloan, and Mr. Herbert to agree to that, quote, minor modification to the SP. So Mr. Jacobs himself knew he was requesting a zoning change, and then Mr. Jacobs proceeded to provide Mr. Herbert with the exact SP language that he wanted. And that's precisely what he got. I'm not sure if it's the job of the zoning administrator to simply interpret an ordinance, the language in the ordinance, or is it to rubber stamp a request from a property owner who wants to change an SP who he suddenly finds inconvenient to him. My two daughters are 3 and 6 years old. They sleep 50 feet from this 25-seat patio. Of course, I am interested to know what time of night the business has to stop activity, and that's what we were promised in this SP. And with this new language, this new interpretation, we have no guarantee of when that has to stop. We could hear patio noise out there till after midnight on school nights, the cars in the parking lot right behind my house, the alley traffic, car doors slamming, car alarms, all the noise that you would expect with a 100-seat restaurant so close to single-family homes. We now have absolutely no certainty when that's going to end. So I do believe that this was simply a mechanism to circumvent the proper SP amendment process, and it really undermines the the public interest in, the public, it degrades the trust that I would have in an SP process if I can't trust that what was promised to us is actually going to be enacted. And if we can just have a property owner come along and suddenly decide they don't like the terms of that agreement and then have new language constructed and construed to their favor, I just think it's an overreach, and I respectfully ask that you grant this appeal. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Good afternoon, members of the board. Jason Holloman, 4800 Charlotte Avenue. And as was previously mentioned, I was the council person at the time that this property was rezoned. What I really want to do is just kind of give you what the negotiation was. So maybe you have a little bit of background on this. This was, as some of you may know, I think the last iteration was like an Italian grocery store, but it was really a corner grocery store. A lot of our urban neighborhoods had small grocery stores scattered throughout in East Nashville, Sylvan Park, and this was one of those. It was, once we did the mass COMZO rezone, zoned commercial neighborhood. And so when the developer originally came to me, there was 2 lots. There was the residential zone property and there was this commercial zone property. Because it was a commercial neighborhood, it was limited in the square footage that a restaurant could have. However, because that building was there, it actually had a grandfathered larger space. That building was in pretty bad shape. It was mostly concrete block. It was not attractive. And so the negotiation that we had was that they would get a second retail space, which is what you now see as the Scouts Barbershop, was originally contemplated to be a bakery. And in exchange for getting that extra retail space and therefore a larger overall commercial footprint than what they had by right under commercial zoning, or certainly with the building that they had. In exchange for that, they agreed that they would limit the restaurant space. And the idea in limiting the restaurant space was that the concerns from the neighborhood were primarily nighttime traffic and parking. And obviously, it was going to be the restaurant, not the other retail space, that was going to tend to drive that. So they agreed to that, and they also agreed to nighttime closure hours of 10 p.m., as has previously been discussed. And it specifically says not open to the public, because I had a request from the former developer, and I'll say that's not the person who's here today, it's the person who sold out. But they specifically asked that we couch it in terms of open to the public so that they could still do napkin rolling, floor waxing, all of the things that tend to happen when a restaurant closes down, but they wouldn't be causing a traffic and parking issue, which is what the primary concern during the negotiation with the neighborhood is. So that's a little bit of background as to how it happened and the reason for the specific language at the time.
Okay, question. If you wanted everyone out of there, Mr. Holloman, at 10 p.m., how come you didn't put that in the law, the statute?
Well, I frankly don't think there's any ambiguity in closed to the public. That means the public isn't going to be there.
Yes, there is. We have many letters from restaurant operators that talk about what closing time is. And one in particular I would like to cite is from the co-owner and CEO of Ted's Montana Grill. And it sounds like maybe this is the big CEO. But he says it's not customary nor hospitable to force patrons to leave a restaurant premises prior to them completing their meal. In my 30 or more years in the restaurant industry, I do not know of any full-service restaurants that have a policy of forcing patrons to leave the premises at closing time posted on the door if the patron is still eating their meals.
I don't think anybody thought that. I think that when you know that you're going to be closed to the public at 10 o'clock, you stop seating people around 9 or 9:30.
Well, what happens if the person at 9:30 is still eating their steak?
The same thing as when you show up to another restaurant and they say that they're no longer seating. I see that happen at Cafe Nona all the time.
But that's different. They're no longer seating because it's 10 o'clock. Then you're eating a steak and they're saying it's 10 o'clock. You got to go.
I guess what I'm saying is that the close to the public is when it is no longer open to the public. And like any business, you know how long that process takes as a restaurant owner. And so you have to couch out what time your last seating is to accommodate your restrictions.
So, Mr. Holloman.
Let me see if I can interrupt. I don't know how else we could have written it other than to say closed to the public. Because frankly, there was no discussion other than we want to be sure that we can still have our staff on site to do the remedial work that needs to be done. And so the dividing line between that and open was closed to the public.
I guess what I just heard you say sounded, the logic sounded very similar to what I see from the zoning administrator, in that, you know, if somebody is eating their steak and they got there at 9:30 and at 10:15 they finish, that's fine, but you don't want somebody advertising, hey, get in by 10 and we're going to party till midnight. And I don't think that's the intent of what the zoning administrator, I don't read that as that. So the question either probably to the attorney is that, you know, why is it important for this now rather than, you know, we talked about a lot of hypotheticals and I heard a lot of hypotheticals mentioned, but it seems like that's where you know, when that violation happens, when somebody advertises, hey, in by 9:59 and 35 seconds or 59 seconds, and, you know, we're going to drink beer all night, that you go back to the zoning folks and say, hey, this is clearly in violation because this isn't someone eating a steak that, or, you know, having dinner that got there at 9:30 or, you know, even, you know, 9:40, depending upon the type of restaurant. And you know, it seems like a lot of these potential problems are potential problems, but they haven't happened, and they really don't violate what the zoning administrator has interpreted the rule to be. You know, I mean, I guess it just seems like why is this necessary, and what recourse would you not have if we just upheld the zoning administrator?
If I may say, there's three things. First, the zoning administrator's ruling that essentially becomes what the ordinance is. So if I'm asking a zoning inspector to go out there, the zoning inspector is going to pull the file, and it says these people are allowed to complete their meals. There was no definition of that. I can't tell them not to. As a former council member, I can tell you that I used to have people say houses had more people in them than they were supposed to, and codes would go and they would say, oh no, we're just playing cards at 2 a.m. And so it's, you know, there's certain things that you can't enforce, and this would add in that lack of enforceability. The second thing is that it's entirely different. The applicant, we want to make it clear, the appellants have no intention of telling people how to run their businesses. This is very important that this space is not a restaurant space. This is a commercial space. The time of 10 p.m., and the only reason you just say it and you don't say, hey, if you're eating, you don't list 576 different uses and say what has to happen for those particular uses, is that you've made it clear that if this is a record store, it's open to the public, you have to leave at 10 p.m.
But isn't that very different? I mean, retail is very different than food because there's preparation of the food. It takes people different amount of time to eat their food.
Absolutely.
So under your logic, you would want this restaurant to kick people out physically and get everyone cleared out by 10 o'clock, whether they're finished or not.
I would say, first of all, that it's the restaurant.
Is that a yes or no?
It needs to be approximately that time, but the neighbors have never said.
10 o'clock, you want them gone, even if they haven't finished their food.
You know, Mr. Ewing, I don't know exactly what would happen precisely at 10 o'clock. These neighbors have been reasonable since day one, and they've even met with them and said, we're not going to be out there with a stopwatch. But the point is, this owner, this restaurateur, originally came in and said they wanted 11, and they apparently feel they've gotten that, because they're now okay with the new interpretation because they know you can come in at 10 and stay. I understand, and I think it's important that I be given the opportunity to address that, yes, a restaurant owner needs to know what time to set the closing. The zoning, that's the third issue. Zoning is very different than what one puts on one's door.
Mr. Kleinfelder, you call it new interpretation. We have another a letter by Local Taco, the owner of Local Taco, who is right nearby. And he says, in the restaurant industry, it is customary that the posting closing time means the time in which no new guests are welcome to enter the establishment.
Absolutely. We agree with that 100%.
This isn't new to the restaurant industry. This is
correct.
We have many letters in the file from people that own restaurants that say...
This is unique, though. Not one of those restaurants Not a single restaurant, as far as we could find, anywhere in the city, and I imagine the zoning administrator may have also looked too, has a zoned time. This is not, I absolutely agree, and I am certainly not going to disagree. I worked in the restaurant industry. That time on your door is between you, your staff, every staff person ever worked at a restaurant. Your time, if you close at 10, it probably says 11 on the time, the timesheet, because that's about how long it takes to shut down the place, clean up, and put the chairs on the tables and that kind of thing. That's not what this is. This is telling them what to post on their door. The saying that the zoning, just like if the zoning said you could only have 6 people inside there. Let's say that was the agreed upon statement in the zoning, and the restaurant has room for 100. So that restaurant owner, it would be perceived and could be seen as unreasonable to say, wait, I can only have 6 people in here? But you'd say yes, because that's the zoning. And in this case, this is the zoning. It was adopted, right or wrong, for better or for worse. It is the zoning requirement.
But there's standards in the restaurant industry, and you have not done anything to refute these standards in the restaurant industry. And I asked you again, should they kick people out at 10 o'clock that haven't finished their food? Get out.
If that's a business problem that they have, they need to meet the zoning.
Okay, so under your interpretation, they should have to kick everyone out and clear the place by 10 o'clock.
They should set their time of closing, at which they post on their door, at a time that allows them to allow people to pleasantly and enjoyably finish their meals.
So if a couple is on their 25th wedding anniversary and they want a leisurely meal and they haven't left by 10 o'clock, kick them out?
I'm sorry we're being so argumentative about this. I believe that 10 o'clock is 10 o'clock, and it's in the zoning code, and I don't know where we get to make these
exceptions.
Because
we're interpreting whether the zoning administrator is right or wrong. So that's why I wanted to get you on the record about that.
I would ask, I'm sorry. No, go ahead. Our standard for overturning the administrator's position is, is he in error? And, or is he arbitrary and capriciously interpreting something? And I haven't heard any testimony that says either of those. I mean, I understand that you disagree, but I don't see, based on the points that Mr. Ewan has raised, that he's in error, but I certainly don't see this as arbitrary or capricious. Can you address that?
I'm not sure that's the standard for item A's. If it is, I believe that indications of it being arbitrary is that it was the owner's proposal. And it was simply, the owner proposed a modification, and for that to be adopted as a interpretation is different, number one. Number two, again, I don't think they understood or knew that there had been very specific legislative discussions by the council member, by everyone that was addressing a specific issue that is essentially thrown out. I mean, all the neighbors.
But the specific issues, I mean, we're only dealing with what ended up in the legislation, not what was discussed.
Correct. Open to the public. When can the public be there?
Well, let me ask you this, and again, I think it's good to challenge a lot of these things, especially because this is something we haven't heard before, and I haven't heard it in almost 5 years, and so it's, I think and I know you feel like you're on the defensive sometimes, but y'all are lawyers. You get that all every day, right?
Doesn't hurt our feelings.
But to try to really ferret this out and make sure we understand it. But when I read open to the public, and I know there are legal definitions, but I also think of the times that I've gone by an establishment that was having a giant event, and right on the door it said "Not open to the public, private event." It wasn't open to the public, and this says, it's. Can you have a private event after 10 o'clock? I mean, what is it? I mean, we're starting to talk about language, and so I don't know that.
I don't disagree that there can be ambiguities in it, which is the only reason you're allowed to look at the history. Were it not ambiguous, again, were it to say 6 people may be in this restaurant, then you can only have 6 people in the restaurant, and you wouldn't, regardless of how absurd that may be, it had to be changed legislatively. And that's the thing. If it needs to be changed, change it legislatively.
Okay, I'm going to speak as a non-lawyer and someone who reads the zoning code often and who often doesn't always understand the zoning code. And I will write to Mr. Herbert and Mr. Michael and ask questions. And so, truthfully, I read it the way you all read it, that the public shouldn't be in there after 10 p.m. I'm not a restaurateur, I'm just someone reading it. So I understand your point, and so I do have a question for the zoning administrator. Is your letter just specific to this permit that was pulled for the restaurant?
My letter is specific to this property, and so the question's been raised as to how this came to me, and Mr. Kleinfelter has intimated that that if I render an opinion on this, that I'm circumventing the legislative process in council. So let me explain how this came to me.
Yes.
I had no knowledge of this issue at all until a certain point, I don't know, several days before whenever I wrote the letter. I was contacted by the council person. I was contacted by the planning department and said, it looks like you're probably going to have to interpret the language of this SP. You're the zoning administrator, like it or not, that SP is a base zoning, and you're going to have to interpret this language. So that's what I then talked to the council person for the district. I then met with and talked with the planning department, asked for their input, considered it, and then wrote the letter that I wrote. Now, I did receive language that was forwarded to me from both the planning department and the council person as to what the neighborhood group had suggested. I did make some minor alterations, but I considered it independently. But I did seek advice from planning and from the council person for the district before writing the letter, and I thought that what I wrote was reasonable. So that's how it came to me, was via the council person and the planning department as being my duty to interpret a base zoning, an SP-based zoning.
And now, I have a question for Mr. Herbert as well. So it is a zoning, so it deals with the use of this particular piece of property. And if a subsequent owner had a different business, would they be able to ask for a different interpretation of the language? Given the industry, I mean, we've had letters from the restaurant industry, would something else be different?
I'd say it's possible that it could be, because what was put to me squarely by the planning department and the council person was, we've got a restaurant. This is the use that is going to be allowed in this space. Now, opine upon the language that is contained with the SP. I was not involved with that language in drafting it in any way, shape, or form. Had no knowledge of that language until it was put to me a few days before I wrote that letter.
Well, Mr. Kleinfelter or Mr. Holloman, then I'm a little, are you suggesting that this was an erroneous determination or that it was
Well, I'll say I don't think it's what was intended in the discussions that were had during the original zoning, because the concern was that obviously you could stay open significantly later under typical, noise ordinance, all those types of regulations. And so, as I think was mentioned earlier, the neighbors said to me they wanted a closing time of 9 o'clock. And with some back and forth and trying to attract a more high-end restaurant space, we wanted to have it a little bit longer. And so we said 10 o'clock. And then the developer came back and said, well, I just want to be clear that when we say closed, I can still have my employees inside because I need to roll silverware, mop floors, that kind of stuff. And because the issue from the neighbor's point of view was not anti-restaurant, it was that they were worried about traffic in their neighborhood on particularly weekend nights when they're at home in the immediate vicinity, late. And so that was the reason. So I guess all I can tell you is that. So I guess what I would say is I disagree with that interpretation based on the legislative history that I have personal knowledge of. I don't know that Bill had that, frankly, legislative history in front of him when he made this decision. But I will also say that I believe that you as the zoning authority for the county have the authority to look at this ordinance and make a determination. You know, it's not an arbitrary and capricious. It's just simply that you look at it with your eyes, and you are the ultimate deciders in Davidson County as to what a zoning ordinance that I or anybody else wrote says. And then if someone disagrees with that, it can go to Chancery Court.
Sure, but the legislative history, as you refer to it, dealt with a specific use for this property at that time. It could have been, I mean, you were contemplating that it would be a restaurant.
All along, it was described to me as a restaurant space. And frankly, I felt like if we addressed it for a restaurant space, which I think we all agree is a little more complicated than, you know, an ice cream shop. There's 3 to 5 minutes between the last order and the person out the door. So nobody was worried about it for retail or ice cream shop or anything like that. And frankly, beyond that, in a neighborhood space, there aren't a lot of businesses that would come in and be open anywhere near this time of night. You know, the bakery, the barber shop is not open, you know, nearly as late. So.
But I think, doesn't it just go to what I hear your constituents or the neighbors saying is they feel a little bit like they got flim-flammed and they want some certainty about when is it going to be quiet.
Well, and I'll tell you, the reason that I came today is because I feel a little responsibility that and as I think Mr. Irwin said, this was not a short process. I mean, this was a lot of give and take and back and forth over about a year period, and this is one of the things that they thought they got out of it was, you know, a pretty early night for the restaurant.
But don't you think we're addressing a problem that really may not be a problem?
Well, I guess I heard Mr. Taylor say that too, and I would kind of put it back to you, and I will say, originally I suggested on the beer permit side, Park Cafe has been in business for a long time. When I got on the council, they had been in business for several years and had never had a beer permit. They came and approached me and asked for the beer distance waiver, and I went to the neighbors, and the neighbors had a good relationship with Willie. He was a good neighbor, and so they happily supported it. My suggestion to the original developers was, I think you should get open, should demonstrate, particularly after all this back and forth, that you're going to be a good neighbor, and then seek a beer permit. You know, restaurants have certainly survived and thrived in this particular area without an immediate beer permit. What's the point of that? I would take that same statement and turn it back to both of you and say, let's see if it's a problem. I don't think it's that likely, I hope, that saying you got to figure out when to close, when to stop serving food in order to make the 10 o'clock deadline. I don't think that's an issue. So let's see if it really becomes a problem for them. Do they have a throng of people beating on their door at 9:45 wanting to be seated? That's a little bit late if you're not really seeking out a late night crowd, not advertising for late night restaurant. And so I would just say, I don't see why we can't say close to the public means close to the public. And if it becomes an issue, then as Mr. Kleinfelter pointed out, there's a cure for this. It's to go back through the legislative process where there's a lot more opportunity than, 15 minutes divided among however many people can come here for public input in that process. And I think that's the appropriate place to address that if it needs to be addressed down the line. And I will also say one more thing, which is that in terms of interpretation, I do think that this has impact beyond this case in that these are all minutes and records that can be pulled, and rest assured, good lawyers in town will remind this board of what they meant was open to the public in other situations down the road.
No, this applies to this particular case. We're here to decide if Bill Herbert,
but if the same phrase is placed in the code.
No, you know better than this. We're here to decide if this case is correct or not, and our ruling does not apply because this is an item A case. It applies to this case and this case only.
I was simply pointing out the phrase.
As a former councilman, you know that this doesn't have any precedent on any other restaurant. It's just this case because we are ruling whether Bill Herbert made the right decision or not.
We can disagree about that.
Okay.
Can I ask a question of the neighbor? I forgot your name. The doctor. I'm sorry. I believe you said that you live right next door to the building.
Yes, I saw my house in one of those photos. It's immediately adjacent, just next to the property.
Has the restaurant been in operation?
No, there's been nothing there yet.
Okay, so there's no way to really determine.
No, and I think our concern from the noise perspective is really that it's a 100-seat restaurant with a 25-seat patio right in the midst of residential zoning, completely surrounded.
And there's no, I see, so there's no landscape buffer or any kind of buffer?
No, not on my
between-
side. On the other side, they have a little bit of landscape buffer next to those homes, but I mean, my children literally sleep 50 feet from this patio.
Yeah, understood. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, any other comments for the folks here? If not, they will have 1 minute and 59 seconds. Will they? No, this is item A, so. What?
It's still their appeal. They'll still get
okay,
to
so
2 minutes.
they'll get to come back. Let's hear from the applicant. Please state your name for the record and tell us why the zoning administrator should be upheld.
Good afternoon, members of the board. I'm Adam Lefevre.
Please press the button.
Hear me?
Yeah.
Good afternoon, members of the board. I'm Adam Lefevre. I'm here on behalf of the landowner and the proposed restaurateur. As the board's aware, this is an item A appeal only interpreting whether Mr. Herbert erred with his interpretation of the SP language. The language which is before you was clear in that it had a hour of operation that ended at 10 o'clock. But we must look at the permitted uses of this property, one of which is a full-service restaurant. There's been a lot of discussion so far about what it means to be a restaurant. And I would point you to all of the letters Mr. Ewing addressed. I believe there's 6 or 7 in the file from local restaurateurs, one a national restaurateur from Ted's Montana Grill that says it's impossible and unheard of to have a time where everybody's kicked out of the establishment. Now, the appellants, from everything I've heard today, are relying on legislative intent to back their position that there was a lot of discussion between the neighborhood, and then it was a legislative intent to have this thing closed to the public, everybody out by 10 o'clock. And the board, as you're aware, is a quasi-judicial body, so I'm going to reference some case law for you regarding legislative intent. Tennessee, when addressing legislative intent, has said that it requires more than just silence in the language. In this case, the SP is silent of whether it means kick people out at 10 o'clock or people can finish their meals. There's nothing in the legislation, whether it be the minutes of planning meetings, council meetings, the videos of both, that addresses the hours of operation. Mr. Holloman, former councilperson Holloman, was up here testifying about what he deemed to be legislative intent. And the courts have also addressed testimony of legislative intent by council people, in this case, former council person. And the case law says when examining legislative intent, the letters, testimony, or other evidence rendered by a legislator retrospectively is not admissible on such issues. And there's a reason for that. Just as I believe some of you were pointing out, there was an opportunity on the front end to put in more specific language that would have dealt with this. It was not included. Another issue is contract zoning. As the board's aware, contract zoning is prohibited in Tennessee. This clearly looks like a quid pro quo situation where the council, presumably, if that was the case, voted on approval of this SP only if everybody was out by 10 o'clock. That didn't occur, and if that was the case, its contract zoning would not be applicable and would be improper in this case. I'm going to let Ms. Victoria Rothberg speak. She is a leasehold interest in the property. She's the proposed restaurateur. Ms. Rothberg's had numerous neighborhood meetings, both formal with the Sylvan Park Neighborhood Association and informal in some people's houses, including some of the appellants' houses. Ms. Rothberg is going to discuss what happened in the meetings, the concept for the restaurant. It is, just for clarification, a 77-seat restaurant with a patio, not a 100-seat restaurant inside. So this is Ms. Rothberg.
Thank you, Adam. Good afternoon. As Adam said, my name is Victoria Rothberg, and I am one of the restaurateurs, the owner and operator for this specific location. For reference, I also live at 4510 Charlotte Avenue, which is 7 blocks from the restaurant, my second home, hopefully. My partner and I both grew up working in neighborhood restaurants. Although we have learned a great deal from working in the corporate setting, our passion is absolutely working in the neighborhood setting, and so as a result, our concept is absolutely to be a neighborhood restaurant. Our number one goal is to provide a comfortable environment where our guests can come and connect and embrace each other's company. Just for fun facts, our cuisine will be globally inspired with plates priced moderately to hopefully drive repeat guests within the neighborhood. We're very excited to be serving the Nashville community, especially Sylvan Park, and I know there are a lot of neighbors that are excited for us to open. As Adam said, we have attended numerous neighborhood meetings and even went door to door over the summer to meet hundreds of Sylvan Park residents. We know that the overwhelming majority of this neighborhood is in support of both our restaurant and Mr. Herbert's interpretation. In fact, we have over 150 signatures from the neighborhood that support even a more liberal hours, as the appellants mentioned, to 11 o'clock p.m. on the weekends. However, we wanted to compromise with this opposition, and to show this, we met with 7 of the appellants late September at one of the signatories' house. Councilwoman Murphy was also there. Everyone at that table agreed that it was never the intent of the SP to mean a kick guest out time at 10 o'clock. And that a 10 p.m. restaurant closure time was reasonable. However, here we are. The appellants will have you believe that we are not supported by the close proximity neighbors, but I want to ensure that you as the board understand that this is simply not correct. There are technically 7 houses that are our immediate neighbors and surround the property. 3 are on Nebraska and 4 are on Utah. Of those 7, 4 are direct supporters and have sent letters to you all. 2 are either short-term or long-term rentals that I've not been able to make contact with, and 1 is a signatory on the appeal. If we include more houses and even the houses across 46th, our support even grows. So I ask today that you will uphold the interpretation from Mr. Herbert for the reasons we have shown. I assure you, my partner and I are 100% committed to making this restaurant focused on simply nourishing this neighborhood and Nashville community.
Question, when you talk about, when you hear the language and say, hey, no new patrons after 10, as a restaurateur, what does that mean to you? What would you see in terms of advertising? Hey, come eat, we're open till 10, but if I called for a reservation and said, hey, I want a reservation for 10 or 8 folks, when would you suggest, what's that frame that you would suggest I would?
So we absolutely will be posting the hours of operation on the front door, which will be closed at 10. So if a guest wanted to make a reservation at 10 o'clock, that we would not accept that reservation.
When you say closed at 10, does that mean closed and everyone cleared out of the restaurant?
Nope, that just means closed and no new guests.
So the kitchen closes at 10, basically?
I mean, if there was a guest that walked in, let's say at 9:45 and...
As long as they order before 10, you'll serve them?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But if 10:01, I'm not able to order.
Yeah, again, the question becomes, if the guest was in there enjoying their meal and they want, they just got in and they were trying to order, we would let them order, but we would like to not kick guests out. I've been in the restaurant industry, I know I look young, but for as long as I have been working, and guests are very polite, and no one wants to be the last guest in a restaurant. And we have every intention of closing at 10 o'clock. This is not to try to do anything differently. And we want to be respectful of our guests, but we also want to be respectful of neighbors and business owners. And, we can't have employees there till midnight when we stop generating money at 10. So this is, we want to close at 10.
Does your concept, and again, I know it's a competitive market, and you want to tell us enough to know it's a neighborhood joint. You've told a lot of neighbors, but I'm sure you don't want to unveil your logo and your menu and all that until it's time for you to do that. But the neighbors have talked about, well, if you're going to show a football game and have a beer fest and all that kind of thing, does your concept, and which I think is a legitimate issue.
Well, I can directly answer that. We have no television. There will be, the music that we have selected is strictly background music. There is not even space for live music, and we absolutely don't want to attract that type of guest because that's not I want to manage employees and not unruly guests.
It's not the concept that you're going for, is what I
Yes,
thank
sir.
you.
That's correct.
So tell me about the co-owner and CEO of Ted's Montana. We have a letter from him.
You do.
And he basically says that he worked with you.
He did, yes. So
And
go ahead.
he's basically saying, as the CEO of a nationwide restaurant company, he does not know of any case, because it's not customary or hospitable. Talk about that.
Sure.
You're in the restaurant industry, but service is just as important as food, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I wear a pineapple around my neck, which is the symbol of hospitality. That's why I'm in this business. I think what you discussed earlier is if guests are choosing our location to spend their evening out and their disposable income, and they happen to be finishing their meal, after the posted closing hour, I can't imagine how unhospitable that would be to ask them to leave.
Has that been your experience of any full-service Nashville restaurant to kick guests out?
No, I've never heard of that. And I don't think any restaurant does that. I do know, of course, with the liquor laws at, last call at 3 a.m., the lights turn on, but that's very different.
Okay.
Now I'd like to address one more issue with permission. Just a little bit of the history. The client did file an application to amend the SP, paid the $2,400 fee to do that. After neighborhood meetings, there was some support to extend the closing time to 11. However, there was the Sylvan Park Neighborhood Association meeting where not everybody, I apologize, 33 to 18 agreed that the 10 o'clock time was never intended to kick everybody out.
Mr. Kleinfelter described that 33 to 18 as not overwhelming as far as the vote. So two-thirds not overwhelming, Counselor?
Considering, in my experience, those opposed to a project are more than likely to show up than those that are in favor.
But is two-thirds overwhelming?
I would argue yes.
Okay.
But that being said, $2,400, they had the neighborhood meeting, 33 to 18, they agreed that 10 o'clock was never expected to be a kick-out time. With that vote with the Sylvan Park Neighborhood Association, my client withdrew the amendment to the SP in reliance on that vote. After my client withdrew the SP, this appeal comes in. Without that vote, my client probably wouldn't have signed the lease, probably wouldn't have proceeded with the restaurant. But being that the majority, 66% of the neighborhoods, were in favor of 10 o'clock not being the kickout time, my client proceeded and effectively lost $2,400.
So Mr. Herbert's letter, I'm going to read from it. It says, closing time should be construed to mean the time at which new patrons are not allowed to enter the premises. If the business is a full-service restaurant, patrons entering the premises prior to 10 should be permitted to finish their meal before having to exit the premises. So the letters that you have submitted basically say that.
They basically say that, and I believe the board will see those letters are from most of with the exception of Ted's, who's a national chain, those are from predominantly local, one-location restaurants. So small businesses that rely on that interpretation, not Mr. Herbert's interpretation, but the closing time of as long as you're in before a certain time, you can eat your meal, then leave.
Anything else to add?
I believe that is it. To David's point, there is the issue of if noise becomes an issue or if traffic or parking become an issue, there is a way to deal with that through the appropriate administrations, whether it be a nuisance complaint or other avenues. So I believe, as David pointed out, we're a little premature here in estimating what could happen. It seemed like there was a counter argument that the business could just open with the 9 o'clock time, see how things went, and then if things weren't going well, they could apply to amend the SP. Business just doesn't work that way. You don't open a business, fail, and then go to try to amend something. By that time, you're finished. Okay, so it's impractical to open with a proposed closing time. Things aren't working out. We'll go through the 3-month process, perhaps, if not longer, of an SP, try to survive while things aren't going well, and then hopefully get the hours extended. It's just not practical as a business.
Okay. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
I think you may have said this, but do you rent the property and there's another property owner?
Yes, I am a leaseholder. I'm not the property owner.
Is the property owner here?
Yes, he is.
Okay.
And the property owner has also been involved in a lot of the neighborhood meetings and discussions.
Anything else? Is there anybody else that wants to speak on your behalf here?
How much time do we have left?
You have 8 minutes and 37 seconds.
I believe there are a couple of neighbors that would like to speak.
Please come forward. State your name and identify yourself for the record and why you're here.
All righty. Hi, my name is William Ripley. And I want to say first and foremost that
where do you live?
I live at 135 46th Avenue North. So actually, John Michael, if you could pull up the picture, the overhead, you can actually see my house as well. I'm right there on the left. You can see the corner of my yard and the front porch there, right where the car
With
is.
the sidewalk coming down.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm first and foremost, I'm not a lawyer. I'm in IT, and I just wanted to speak about this though, and first compliment my local neighbors here. I share their concern that this be I don't want this to be something where you have people partying till midnight, and I would not be speaking in support if I thought that's what this was. I've had many discussions with Victoria and Chris, the proposed restaurant owners, and quite frankly, I think that if our goal is to keep this restaurant as a neighborhood-friendly restaurant that doesn't cause late-night noise and things like that, then I think that the interpretation of this, the current interpretation of this is exactly what we need. As somebody who goes to bed before 10 p.m., I think that a full wave of people exiting the restaurant and all of the chatter that goes with that is more likely to wake me up than a slow stream of satiated guests walking out pleasantly, at 10 or 10:15, whatever the case may be. So I don't see this as a Pandora's box situation. And as was referenced earlier, I think that there are plenty of options for recourse if there is any sort of issue with this. I have the single best view, I believe, of the front of the restaurant and the patio there. Conversely, they have the best view of me and my wife and our house. And so if they're causing disruption, Victoria will hear from me very quickly on that front. And then finally, I just want to say that I was there at the SPNA meeting where I don't know if it was 33 to 18, but it was roughly 2-1 on the vote. And I was really hoping that that was going to be the end of the matter. I've lived at my property for about 3 years now. When I moved in, it was a vacant space across the street. The Italian market had gone out of business. And I was excited. My wife and I talked, and our parents texted us practically daily. Have you heard anything? What's going to go in there? What's that going to be instead of just this vacant eyesore? And, 3 years later, it's still vacant. I was thrilled when I heard about this concept coming in. And there have been about 4 or 5 different rounds of, oh yeah, this will work. We finally agreed on something. And then it got pulled back. And I thought for sure that the neighborhood association meeting with the 2-1 vote, that to me, that said overwhelming majority. I don't know if supermajority is the right term for that. As I said, I'm not a lawyer, but I thought that would be the end of it. I was not thrilled about showing up here today and doing this public speaking. I need to run back to work after this. So I think I'll leave it there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Please come forward.
Good afternoon. I'm Alan Grant. I live at 4508 Wyoming, right around the corner from Mr. Ripley. Essentially the corner of 46 in Utah. While I am an attorney, I will come to you today as a neighbor, not as an attorney, and as one who was involved in the history of this project. Just give you a little bit of insight. Now, I'll start by saying I actually was not able to be at that SPNA meeting. I'm a member. My wife's on the board. We, however, have a 2-year-old and also a 3-month-old, as do many people who live in our neighborhood, and most of them can't go to the 7 p.m. meeting on a Monday. So you might as well consider it 35 to 18 if you want to count me and Stephanie Grant. That being said, I want to correct a couple of just, well, first I wanted to point out that the appellants just almost obstructionist unwillingness to admit your request that, yes, they're asking the restaurant to kick people out at 10 p.m. Like that, they should own up to that. That is what's being asked. Regardless of that, Mr. Holloman, then councilman, is asking you to believe that all parties agreed that the restaurateurs were going to have to kick people out, and that's just not true. I was at those meetings too, and I never contemplated that. Who in their wildest dreams would ever contemplate a restaurant is going to kick somebody out at the closing time? My wife and I, you mentioned an anniversary dinner. If we wanted to go over there, I mean, we will walk to this place. And if we wanted to go there and we couldn't get there till after bedtime, we're going to have to think, well, it's 7:45 now. Are we going to get a glass of wine? How long is our dinner going to take? It's 8:30. I don't think we can go because it's 8:30. We never in our wildest dreams ever would have thought that. And as far as the other parties who were involved, Mr. Holloman mentioned, well, it was contemplated that a restaurant space would go in there. No, it was contemplated that Doug Hogriff and Deb Paquette were going to go into that space, that they were going to put a restaurant there. Doug Hogriff, who rarely makes appearances on social media, actually posted on Facebook in a thread about this. And I'd quote it for you, but I don't know that it's necessary, but essentially lambasting this idea that he ever would have agreed to pursue a restaurant in this space if he was forced to ask people to get out of there at 10 p.m. That's ludicrous. I'm sorry. It's ludicrous. As far as these suggestions that, or I know by appearance's sake, there's more people here in opposition to this, or I guess for the appellants, than there are in support of the applicants. As it was mentioned a moment ago, you're going to have 10 people in opposition show up for everything for one in support. It's all of us are setting aside our schedules to be here today. I'm not billing the clients right now because I'm sitting here and because it's important, and just like everybody else is setting aside time today, so I'm not any more important. But I would not be swayed to think that there are more people in the neighborhood that oppose this. Lastly, I'll note there was a meeting hosted by Councilperson Murphy, who has held exhaustive amount of meetings, and frankly, I would not want to have gone through what she's gone through with this project alone. The amount of meetings she's had to hold. Back in June at the Metro Police Precinct, there must have been 60 people in that room. 3/4 of them raised their hands or stood up in support of the 11 p.m. closing time and of the beer permit. The neighborhood supports this. This is a case of sour grapes, of people who didn't like the process. There were certainly some missteps prior to developers, but that's in the past. The SP says what it says. It's vague, and that, frankly, should be construed against the drafter, and that's Jason Holloman. And he could have corrected it. He could have said, I think a moment ago, Mr. King, you asked, what could you have written in there? Well, they could have written that customers have to be out by 10 p.m. Could have written out that non-employees have to be out by 10 p.m., but it doesn't say anything. Long and short of it is, it's a legal issue. I think if this did go to Chancery, Chancery would rule in the applicant's favor. But as far as a neighbor, please let this proceed. This issue has been going on way too long, and I think they deserve the right to do it. Thank you.
Any questions?
Well, I don't know if I have a question. I just want to. I'm
to
listening to what everyone's saying.
I'm just one neighbor. I'd be happy to field questions you have on that.
Yeah, I don't think it's a question, but it's something you brought up about how you can sit. It's fine. Okay. How the SP is written, and just for everyone's knowledge who doesn't have it in front of them, it just number 6 of section 4 says. A business within tenant space B shall not be open to the public outside the hours of 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. It doesn't reference a restaurant. I just thought everyone should be clear on that.
Right. I just mentioned that in the sense was we're all going into the intent of all this. It was always contemplated that this would be a restaurant. There's no doubt about that. There were people who had signed on to a lease. Deb Paquette and Doug Hogriff, the people who owned Houston's and Amerigo and all that, they were the ones who had signed on to put a restaurant in this space. Everybody knew it.
And that was that before the building was built, or is it?
That was in the negotiation process of the SP. We had meetings at McCabe Pub on Sundays, and then I don't know at what point this restaurant group came into the foray, but it was prior to the SP being voted on. I do know that. Okay, well, I misspoke, but either way, even if I'm misspeaking, former Councilman Holloman did mention that a restaurant space was contemplated. So, I think we're kind of getting into the weeds a little bit on that. The point is, as I'm speaking, I'm 500 feet away. I have small children as well. I certainly feel for the neighbor who backs up to this property. She does have a nice large garage. It's not like these people are going to be looking into the backyard. So I feel for her there. also being a person with small children. However, this is a nice restaurant. They're not even going to have a TV. I wasn't even aware of that. I don't think this is going to be some huge nuisance, and I do also agree that we're arguing about something that's not even right.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else speaking in support of this? Support of the zoning administrator?
Good afternoon. My name is Aaron Gumpenberger. I'm at 346th Avenue North. I'm not a lawyer, but I did come here with my time off, and I'd like to thank Uncle Ryman for letting me do that. I will go ahead and read just a little snippet of what Mr. Doug Hugriff did say, because during their discussion, they did not bring up at all the name Trust the restaurant, that they had a tenant, and that, lo and behold, they did agree on those hours. Specifically, what was said was, we would have never have moved forward with that project if we had to clear the building at 10 p.m. That is ludicrous. No restaurant does that. So the only thing I'd like to point out to you, if you feel it hasn't been pointed out yet, is why Councilman Holloman then and that group did not make this an issue until now is a red flag. I don't understand why then that was not considered to flush that out and include that in the language. And then once again, we get to the 11th hour, the neighborhood votes on it, and then an appeal is made, and here we are again, taking time out of our work and yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else? You only have 24 seconds if there is. Seeing none. The other side has 1:59 for rebuttal.
Use the 24 seconds, thanks.
Oh.
I'll be very brief. My name is Patrick Burke. I live at 3603 Richland Avenue in Cherokee Park, adjacent to Sylvan Park. I am one of the restaurateurs who wrote those letters. I've operated 2 restaurants in urban neighborhoods in Hillsborough Village and in East Nashville, both within 100 feet of houses. I will support what every other restaurateur said. It is an absolutely unreasonable interpretation to kick guests out. It would be a death sentence to the business. I've never been to a restaurant that does that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Perfect. 1:59 for.
I'll be jumping around a little just so I can hit some things. Most everything you've heard is irrelevant. I mean, I think you know that the discussions, how many people voted in favor of it, how many people didn't vote in favor of it. This is an interpretation of a piece of legislation. There were concerns about that meeting. There were a number of new members apparently made of the association that night. Some of them, my clients and people were turned away, told it wasn't going to be voted on that night. So I just don't think it matters, so I don't want to go too far deep into that. Closing time, absolutely agree. It's a really bad idea to kick people out the time you put on your door. But again, the time you've put, nothing in this ordinance says that's what you have to put on your door. You as a business owner need to plan to make sure that you can accommodate the laws that are in place. You have fire marshal laws, and you're going to kick people out if you accidentally let too many people in, the fire marshal shows up. I mean, no, don't kick people out, but put your sign on your door that says a certain time so you can accommodate the law that was adopted. The person that was quoted, and again, is saying, oh, this is outrageous. He wasn't even on the scene when this SP was adopted. That was after the fact, according to the council member. So the comments about retrospective comments from the council member, you heard them from the council member timing-wise. He had to give them to you today. He was telling you what was debated, what was discussed, and what was included in the intent behind the legislation, and why this language means what it says it means. Of course, I respect Bill completely. I want to make sure it was clear. Whatever I intimated is because I don't think he knew about that history, and he made that clear. He didn't know about that history. So with that history, and this board does have, this Board of Zoning Appeals has the ability to say, based on that, based on what the intent was, then that's what you have to meet as your zoning. We'd recommend, you close at 9, do whatever you need to do on your door. And the most important thing is this sounds like a great restaurant. I'll probably go to this restaurant as long as it's there. These restaurants don't stay forever. And it could be any other, and that's one of the things at zoning. Long time ago on council, people would come in with straight zoning and say, this is going to be a great restaurant. They're not there anymore. And I'm not saying they're going to disappear. They may be around for a while, but you're planning for any restaurant in this space, and it could be a party joint, not what sounds like a nice white napkin place.
Okay. Let's hear from Councilor Murphy. Your name has been brought up a lot today during this process, so tell us why you're here and what your perspective is on Mr. Herbert and his letter.
Sure, I will. I guess, when I was sitting down to kind of think through what am I going to say today, because this has been an issue that has taken up my time over the past year and a half more than any other issue. It has taken up my council staff's time. It has taken up Bill Herbert's time. It has taken up planning's time, because it has been just an ongoing agreement, no, that won't work, back and forth, trying to figure out what is the best situation here. I don't want to get into a whole lot of he said, she said, but I'm sensing from what we've been through today, I kind of do need to go through with at least my experience with this property and the legislative history that I am aware of, and at least the kind of timeline since I was elected in August of 2015. So first, this was a little restaurant, a little market years ago. A couple years ago, I would run by it. My father and brother ate there frequently because they don't eat at home. So this has been a commercial site for a long time. But when did I actually hear of this starting to be an SP here, and issues like that it was actually probably a week or two before early voting in the summer of 2015. That is when this property, it was discovered, had been overbuilt. Evidently, the SP had been passed, but then the previous developers decided to proceed under the non-conforming use law. It was discovered that one of the walls had been torn down. I won't go into too many of those details, but I will tell you that there was a stop work order on this property because the walls were overbuilt for the SP, and so the zoning administrator is fully aware of the history behind that, and I'm sure spent a lot of time. He and Doug are the ones, I think, that took a field trip out here, measured it themselves, found a backhoe actually put inside the building to build to I guess what was told to me was to dig out a basement that was there to help justify space. I mean, it was just all over the place, right? So
I'm the one that put the stop work order on it.
And if I remember correct, since they overbuilt substantially, actually, by the way, they had to remove and tear out a lot of what they built.
Well, so there was options. The options were, is there some way, and I mean, we literally, it's probably washed off now. There were chalk lines of mine with my sidewalk chalk, working with the previous owners and eventually the current owners of, is there a way to configure what they have semi-built to make it work with the SP? Because I was asked by the previous property owners to open up the SP and allow for these walls to stay where they are. I said, not just no, but hell no. I had said that previously during the campaign that, you overbuilt, you overbuilt. I'm sorry. And so when the current property owners, right before they bought it, we went out to lunch and they asked me, is there some way that we can open up the SP and let these walls remain? And I kind of choked and spit out my salad, I think. And I just said, there's no way.
During that period of time, the person who had originally signed the lease, Deb Paquette, who was a very famous restaurateur here, who was supposed to go in this building, I think had hired a chef from somewhere else and was planning to open up a certain time. Since the premises could not be delivered at a certain time, she decided to open up a restaurant somewhere else.
That's my understanding, is because the previous property owners kept kind of hemming and hawing. Of course, the stop work order, we'd have to pull the dates. I mean, I think the stop work order went on probably in July. Those property owners could have torn down those walls and fixed that problem then. They chose to wait. So
let's talk about the current people that we have here.
So getting through to where we are today, I've had community input, I've done an online survey regarding the SP, and I've had community meetings. Regarding the SP amendment that had been mentioned a couple times today, on my online survey, I had over 271 responses, close to 400 emails. And when I broke down the numbers were in support of extending the hours. I even calculated out by the 4-block radius and doubling the votes within the 4-block radius of this property. I spent probably more time on this than I should have. And there was still support to extend the hours. going into that, so I had the community meeting on June 29th, and I actually have the agenda from that meeting. I'm happy to give y'all with my notes on it. There was support there that night by a raise of hands to extend the hours and to approve the beer permit. So from there, to be clear, I requested this letter from Bill whenever, I guess the week that he wrote it. I requested it that Monday, the morning before the Sylvan Park Neighborhood Association took a vote on this, because we had lots of meetings of back and forth where neighbors who are, many of them are the applicants, had said, okay, that's fine, and then no, and yes and no. Why did I wait so long to get a letter from Bill Herbert? Why did I sit down through SP negotiations and bluff with the property owners and the restaurateurs? Because I knew once I got a letter from Bill Herbert, that was the final, that should be the interpretation, right? I mean, it's his job to interpret vague language in the code, and it's the BZA's job to interpret that vague and ambiguity in these SPs. And I knew once I got that letter, I wanted to try to get as much for the neighborhood as I could going into that. So during months of meetings, I kept asking for, is there proof of legislative intent? As a lobbyist at the state level, I frequently ask my bill sponsors or legislation that I'm opposing to state on the floor if their intent is to harm my client or not. And because I know that I've got to get that into the record and on the floor of the State House and State Senate. I know that the council is different, but when I reviewed, and I don't get paid by the hour, so I did not review the actual tape, but when I've reviewed the minutes from the Planning Commission and the minutes from the council meeting, I didn't see any mention of legislative intent on these hours, and I didn't see that there was a mention of the hours necessarily until it got to the council. I didn't see it in what was applied to at the Planning Commission.
So we get that. So is Bill Herbert's letter right or wrong?
So again, it's difficult. And I think at the end of the day, what he has written is what his job is to do, is to take the language that's in the SP and apply it to the real world situations and where the rubber meets the road. That's what y'all do. I mean, we saw that earlier with the fence, with the setbacks and things like that. You have to interpret kind of what is actually on the ground and how these laws apply to that. And I feel without that legislative intent written out or put in plain language that all patrons would be out the door, I think that Bill Herbert wrote the letter that he could write based off of the documentation and a real world experience of a full service restaurant here. Now, if we had asked, I think that if we had asked him for the interpretation of a retail boutique going into this space, if it was going to be a dress shop or one of the other very limited uses here, it can't be like a biker bar or anything like that. But if I had asked him what's the interpretation of the hours for closing time for a retail shop, I'm sure he would probably write something similar, that at 10 o'clock you have to complete your purchase of your dress and move along, that you couldn't just continue to shop for hours on end. So I think that what Bill has done is taken the reality.
You get that kind of, you go to Dillard's or Nordstrom's, you get that, we're about to close in 15 minutes. Please bring your items to the cash register. We will be open at 10 a.m. tomorrow for your convenience.
Right.
You don't hear that kind of announcement in a restaurant, do you?
Correct. And so I think that when we interpret closing time and we interpret close to the public, you've got to interpret it in the sense of the use that we're asking it for. The same closing time isn't the same.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
From your experience, from the day this building was built, it was intentioned to be a restaurant. The intention was for it to be a restaurant.
You know, the SP and everything had been passed before I came along. By the time I came on the scene, it was dead paquette and all that was already there. I was at the SPNA meetings where they voted on whether they should allow them to have a beer permit, and that was approved as long as they got their liquor license. Now, I have had some constituents ask about residential parking only on these streets, and I have said that because I know parking is, I mean, this SP, it's tough because it's so tight. I mean, it was a clear big expansion of commercial use and of the residential and just not a lot of parking at all. I've said we need to wait until this business opens to see about the parking and putting those restrictions on, because like when Edley's opened, it all runs together, maybe 6 months ago, eight months ago, I got a lot of complaints about parking, and it trickled out, and it has kind of worked itself out with people realizing that you can park at the park. And I don't want to create a situation to say no residential parking here, and it just squishes out onto, one of the other streets. But back to the point of did Bill Herbert make the right decision here, yes or no? Do I know the absolute correct answer? Could we dissect what does closed, what does public mean? I got out my law dictionary from my pre-law college days, and there's a lot of ways you can interpret this. And I think that Bill did the best and the most correct answer given the situation, that it is rare that there is hours in an SB. It is rare that any full-use restaurant has restrictions of hours like this. And when you apply it to real world, how do restaurants operate? How would a retail operate? How would a dress shop operate? He interpreted it in the way that restaurants operate. And I think that's the best we could ask him to do.
Thank you. Any questions for Councillady Murphy? We really appreciate your time and energy and effort in trying to get to some sort of conclusion. So thank you.
Thank you.
I've got a question for
the
zoning administrator.
Yes, we're going to close public hearing. You can ask away.
Just a quick question, just because the appellant raised it, and that was that there was some question as to what your thought process or history was. And so I guess given all of the testimony, and it's been very thorough, and the history that we've seen, was there anything that you heard that would change your opinion in your letter?
No.
So fully stand by your opinion in your letter, given the complete and full testimony of all. I'm sure you heard a good bit of it ahead of time, but since they did raise, Bill didn't know this, or I don't know that he was thinking of this when he wrote the letter, all those points have been raised, and those have been considered, and the letter is still how you would approach this property.
I still stand by the letter.
Great, thank you.
I think this is a very easy case. The applicant, they have submitted many letters from restaurants that basically say, this is the standard. And I want to read again the CEO and co-owner of Ted's Montana Grill, which is a nationwide chain, says, it is not customary nor hospitable to force patrons to leave a restaurant premises prior to them completing their meal. In my 30 or more years in the restaurant industry, I do not know of any full-service restaurants that have a policy of forcing patrons to leave the premises at closing time posted on the door if the patron is still eating their meal. And now I'm going to read from Bill Herbert's letter. Closing time should be construed to mean the time at which new patrons are not allowed to enter the premises. If the business is a full-service restaurant, patrons entering the premises prior to 10 p.m. should be permitted to finish their meal before having to exit the premises.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything that would say that the zoning administrator erred in his judgment, and you would certainly vote to support that. And with respect to the neighbors who are concerned, I think that there are many things that can be imagined that might happen that haven't happened, that I think, and frankly, based on testimony, the likelihood of that is very slim, based on the restaurateur who has leased the space. But I think that from the history, from the way this thing evolved, all of these rules were written under the assumption that this was going to be a restaurant, not a standard retail store. And so I do think it's appropriate that Bill applied those standard rules to this SP, and I don't think he erred.
Okay. Other discussion? Seeing none, anyone want to make a motion?
Well, I'm sorry. I guess I did want to say he probably didn't err. I really don't know how to vote in this instance.
Well, this is an item A appeal.
No,
so
I know.
Our role is whether he erred or not.
I know the rules. I know the rules, but I still read it as the non-lawyer who reads the zoning code. And I still don't see where it says that closing time is what needed to be interpreted. It just says business within tenant space B shall not be open to the public. Maybe I'm looking at it too literally. It doesn't say anything about restaurant, but I can see, he was asked to, interpret if a restaurant went there. And so I don't think he probably erred. And but it's really, I don't think it's as easy. And I think, I understand the property owner's concern. There's a business going right next to their home. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Okay. Anyone have a motion?
I move that we find for the appellant and uphold the administrator's interpretation.
We don't, that's backwards.
You mean you uphold the zoning administrator?
I thought the appellant was.
No, the appellant.
I'm sorry.
So you're either voting that
I'm sorry. I move that we uphold the administrator's interpretation.
Okay. Motion's been made. And why are we upholding it? Because the magic words?
I find that he did not err in his interpretation.
Okay. Motion's been made properly. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion's been made properly seconded. Any more discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Did everyone vote yes? Okay, it's unanimous.
Mr. Chairman, if I may recommend a break before the next hearing.
Okay. Have fun. You're gone?
Three cases remaining on our docket. Case number 2017 I want to make sure I call the right case number, 011, which is involving the property at 204 38th Avenue North, requesting a variance from front setback requirements, specifically contextual street front setback requirements in the RS 7.5 district, is a case that has since been suggested for consent agenda vote without having had the public hearing. There is no one here in opposition to that case, Mr. Vice Chairman.
And I believe the council lady was in support of
That's right. She went out of her way to speak in support of the matter before she had to depart for a family matter. So the board would have the opportunity to consider adding that by a separate vote to the consent agenda.
Does anyone have a motion to add that to the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It passes.
We'll show that as a 5-0 passage, and we'll move on to the next regularly scheduled case.
Which one was it, 11? Yeah, 11.
Mr. Vice Chairman, the next case is 2017-006. The appellant, Ms. Andy Crooks, also the owner of the property, has filed an Item A appeal with regard to a short-term rental property as shown here on the zoning map on Rosemary Lane. The street address is 2008 Rosemary Lane here in Nashville. Aerial photo of the subject property where the short-term property or short-term rental had operated without first obtaining the legally required permit. And finally, the front view. Your case file includes some of the data obtained by the Codes Department demonstrating that there had been the prior operation before the permit. That, of course, is an automatic basis for rejection once a permit is applied for. The board, of course, then has the opportunity to review and determine whether or not to reduce the penalty associated with prior operation, if in fact, unless you determine that there was no such violation. With that said, is there any opposition present on this case? Seeing none, the appellants will have 10 minutes to make the desired presentation. Please introduce yourself by name and address.
I'm Andy Crooks, the homeowner at 2008 Rosemary Lane. I've lived in Nashville for 5.5 years. Happy New Year. Thank you for hearing this out.
Thanks for being here. And could you tell us, tell us your story? But is this your home? Is this
is my home?
An owner-occupied home?
Yes.
And then can you tell us when you started renting the home and what happened to make you apply for a permit?
Yes. I started renting the home at the end of September, and then I found out in November that I needed a permit. For some reason, I thought you only needed permission if you were not a homeowner. I didn't research it well enough. I take full responsibility for that. As soon as I found out I needed a permit, I went to Metro Codes with my floor plan and my fees and everything, and they denied me since I had already listed. And we're talking about handfuls of people, not hundreds. And I did want to point out that there are over 3,000 Airbnbs in the city of Nashville, and I looked up how many are permitted, and less than half of them are. So I was trying to do the right thing, and I feel like I'm getting punished for it.
Or did you rent the?
And I'm very nervous.
Once you went to codes and they said, hey, you can't, you have to come here, you stopped renting your place?
Yes, sir. And I filed for the appeal, and I followed all those steps that Debbie helped me with.
Okay.
There's still a sign on my lawn, which I hope to take down today.
Well, absolutely. And we definitely appreciate you trying to do the right thing.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Were there other things that you had to?
I just, some of my neighbors weren't able to make it. They just had a new baby. But I have several letters from my neighbors in support, as well as my neighbors physically here. So I don't know if you want to let her.
John's letter was received.
Oh, her partner sent a letter, John, and I don't know if you got it. And then also Colby Sledge. Oh, sure.
And Colby's your council.
Yes, for District 17.
Okay.
Have her identify herself, too, for the record. What's your name?
Hello, my name is Kathleen O'Sullivan, and I live at 2003 Rosemary Lane. I also go by the name of Cassie. And my partner, Jonathan Lloyd, lives with me. He would be here today, but he's in Mexico starting a music festival. It's very important to know that Andy is an excellent neighbor, and we live in a colorful, characterful neighborhood, to say the least. And I feel that Andy is safer with people of the choosing that she has selected to be in her home. I feel she's safer with people than without them. And when I feel uncomfortable or nervous, I go to Andy.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
I just want to emphasize that I was not trying to make money on the city or not pay my hotel. You know, there's so many other Airbnbs that are doing that, and also that Airbnb is relatively new, and I feel like it's still kind of a complicated process, and I'm just trying to do the right thing by getting a permit.
Right. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Any questions? Okay. Well, we'll close the public hearing. We'll talk about it. And anybody have any comments? I mean, this seems to be the classic case of what we like to see, in that people are trying to do the right things, and when they come here, they, when they stop when they are told to stop, and they come here and try to do right. So, I will tell you that the Metro Council just gave us not too long ago the authority to not waive a penalty, but to determine an appropriate penalty for renting without a permit. It used to be that we had to make people wait a year. We had no option, but we don't have that restriction now. So we are very fortunate and tend to be empathetic with folks like you that come, because there is clear demonstration that you weren't clear about the rules and stopped when you were supposed to stop, and did the right thing by trying to come here and make it right. Does anybody have a motion?
I'll make a motion. Sure. I move that we grant the appeal and set the time of the I'm sorry. I want to say I want to allow them to start renting now, but are we?
I think the language that we've used is that we find in favor of the zoning administrator, because the appellant did admit to renting ahead of time.
I'm sorry.
But
Yes,
the penalty is essentially time served, and you're eligible for your permit today.
Right. What language would you like us to use for the time served part, council? It's really not time served.
And you can say that the zoning administrator was correct, but they've now waited a substantial amount of time and are eligible for a permit.
Okay, I'll take another whack at it.
I just had a question. Have we closed the public hearing? Okay.
But if you'd like to ask a question, we can reopen the public hearing.
No, it's not important.
I'm just mangling my motion here. So I move that we find that the administrator was correct in his decision, and that the time elapsed is enough, and they should be allowed to get their permit as of today.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It passes 5-0. So you can go to the codes department tomorrow and apply for your permit. And provided everything else is in order, you're good to go.
Thank you.
Do you know where that is? I do. Okay.
We've got to
thank
get some
y'all.
boilerplate language for that. It was only when I started talking that I realized that I hadn't completely thought that through.
Okay, and then
Mr. Vice Chairman, your final case is 2017-007. Zev Goring, the appellant and owner of the property located at 1619 Electric Avenue over in East Nashville, has requested a variance from front setback requirements in the RS5 zoning district in order to construct a new single-family house. The zoning map here shows the stretch along Electric where the property is located. The aerial gives you a better view of the existing houses at this location. The site plan submitted demonstrates the proposed setbacks, particularly with regard to the surrounding properties, by which our zoning staff determines the contextual setback requirements in this established development pattern of a neighborhood. Then from my site visit video photos, which I will admit were very, very recent, the view of the property from the street and across the street, then up and down Electric Avenue. Is there anyone here in opposition to this case? Seeing none, Mr. Goring, you have 10 minutes to make the desired presentation to the board. Please introduce yourself by name and address and proceed.
My name is Zev Goring. I live at 1621 Electric Avenue, right next door.
And I'm Robert Thompson with Pfeffer Road Architecture, architect on the project. Just going to reiterate a little bit of what's already been said. If you could switch to the map view. Yeah. There are 31 houses on this block, and 5 of them, my client's property included, kind of break away from the established rhythm, the setback rhythm of the other houses. We're requesting a setback variance from 60 feet to approximately 34 feet, which would be in keeping with the neighborhood and that specific block. Anything to add?
This is going to be our own home. Yes, this is, yeah.
I'm sorry, his primary residence, it's not a development project. He lives next door at 1621, has lived there since 2004, so he's interested in the character and well-being of his own neighborhood.
I think that's about it. And let's see, so this is not a contextual overlay issue, is that?
Contextual overlay or
I'm sorry, no, not contextual overlay, contextual setback.
Thank you. I always get that wrong. You always correct me, and I appreciate it.
Oh, well, I'm knee-deep in contextual overlay issues in my own neighborhood.
The value of having the architects on the board. Okay, so I guess the question is, you mentioned the 31 other homes, and the one that I see, and I'm looking up here, well, from the other drawing to the left, the one that seems a lot closer to the street, I mean, is it the new homes that are setting this?
No, sir.
Or the older homes? I mean,
they are in fact new homes, but if you look at historical records, the original 1950 homes were in that short setback.
The home that is, if you put back the picture, John Michael, there's a large tree covering that one home to the left, but that's an old 1948 home. It's at the 34, 35 feet.
So why were those 4 set back that way? Do you know?
I can answer that. I actually can answer that. Because I've lived there for a long time, and I've been friends with a lot of the neighbors that have lived there since those houses were built. I own 1617, 1619, and 1621. The woman I bought 1617 from bought that house originally in 1948, and she said that one of the original ideas that the developer had at that time was to put 2 houses on those lots. But I guess whoever was in charge at that point said no in 1948. So that was, of course, what she told me. I never checked that information.
It was Bill Herbert. He's been here quite a while, Mr. Vice Chairman.
and since he had another appointment, can't defend himself. Okay. And I really don't, The other, I mean, there's not opposition, which is important, I think, especially in a contextual overlay situation, because it's usually the neighbors that are driving that, and the neighbors that would have the biggest impact on that. Tell me what, I guess, what is, and whatever you are wanting to build, I guess the new home would have to meet the contextual overlay.
Yeah.
In terms of design.
Yes, the height, setbacks, et cetera.
Are there anything that you have to add, or any questions?
I want to ask a question on that, where we saw however many's on that street. That one, that's the picture. I assume this pink is your lot that you want to build on.
Yes, ma'am.
And you're asking that that one be moved forward, even though one on each side is back farther. I just want to make sure, I know you care about the neighborhood, but will that look right, or is that going to make the neighborhood look weird along that section if you move yours up or back farther than theirs are?
I'm gonna answer part of that, and I'm gonna let Robert answer the other part. The house to the left, 1617, I definitely have plans to eventually knock that house down and build that house also. The reason I am a one man, I'm not a developer, so I have to do, and I have a wife and children, so obviously our own home comes first. I could knock both of them down, but I have tenants and they're wonderful people, and there's no reason to knock a house down if I don't need to. The house does not have central heat, and I'm talking about the one to the left now. It doesn't have central heat and air, so I will eventually knock that house down and build that house up, but that could be 2-3 years, I'll be honest. So, and then as to the character of the street, I'm going to let Robert, comment on that.
Yeah, I think, especially since, the one to the left will ultimately, he does have control of that and will ultimately be brought forward. I think overall it's a step contributing to the overall rhythm of the street and the setback that's been already established.
Is the lot now vacant?
No. There are tenants living in that house. 1619, they're currently, it's not vacant. You saw the photos. I think John Michael was out there yesterday and took those photos.
So you're going to tear that down and build another house?
Yeah, 1619. I'm going to tear that down and build my personal home.
You're not planning to build another dwelling on that same property?
I'm sorry, what was it?
You're not planning to build another house on that same property? That's why you want to move it forward?
You're just building a single-family home on 1619?
Correct. Yes, sir.
One house only you're planning to build?
Yes, sir. One house only. As to I think that's the...
It's zoned RS7, so we're limited to a single house.
Any more questions? Do you have anything more that you'd like to add?
No, sir.
Okay, we will close the public hearing and have a discussion. Thank you. Thoughts or comments?
Well, I think what they're proposing is keeping within the context of the neighborhood, and from what we've heard about the contextual street setback, that's the intention of the ordinance. So I think it's acceptable.
Is that a motion?
Sure, unless someone else has comments first.
Well, I'll second that motion.
We need an actual motion, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure. I will move to approve the variance for the street setback because ultimately it will result in the house becoming more contextual with the homes in the neighborhood.
I'll still second that.
All right, we got a motion. We have a second. Any other discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It passes 5-0.
With that concludes the business of the Board of Zoning Appeals. Our next meeting will take place on January the 19th at 1 p.m. here in the Sunny West Conference Room.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.